Chapter 495. The appearance of the four shadow monsters not only disrupted the formation of the wolf demons, but also caused their leader to lose his composure. With the obstruction of the primal fire, he had to guard against the attacks of the flying beasts in the sky while dodging the seal bombardment from the cave. The wolf demons immediately lost their composure. They all lowered their heads and jumped around, not daring to continue to spew out divine light to bombard the cave. Xiao Yu's pressure also decreased a lot, but his expression did not relax much, because he knew that the four shadow monsters could not hold on for too long, and the four shadow monsters could not kill the silver-haired wolf demons. Xiao Yu knew that the four phantom monsters wouldn't be able to hold on for long, but the wolf demons didn't know that, especially the silver-haired wolf demons who were fighting the phantom monsters. The more they fought, the more frightened they became, and the more sullen they felt. Their attacks were useless against the phantom monsters, but the phantom monsters were able to hurt them. They could only take the hits and could not fight back. How could they continue fighting? It would be a waste of energy to continue fighting, and it would only increase the casualties. Therefore, the silver-haired wolf demons wanted to retreat, but the pride of the wolf tribe did not allow them to do so. The wolf pack came with such a large force, and if they just left like this, they would not be willing to. After all, they had lost countless of their kind, but the enemy was not hurt at all. The silver-haired wolf demons were still holding on, but they let out wolf howls and let the wolf pack keep a distance from the cliff so that they could work together to defend against the flying beasts in the sky. Xiao Yu thought that this was a chance for him to continue escaping. So when the wolf pack retreated, he climbed to the top of the cliff again with the silver moon broken saber, and then escaped at full speed with the yin-yang mirror. Howl! A silver-haired wolf howled, and the wolf pack immediately gave up resisting the attack from the sky, and all of them ran after Xiao Yu. In the direction Xiao Yu was heading, there was also a large number of wolf demons. However, they were all ordinary wolf demons. Their speed was not as fast as his, and their reactions were not as agile as his. He was like an afterimage, moving his body in the wolf pack, either dodging or killing. His speed was not slow at all. The four illusory monsters were also fighting and retreating while dragging the silver-furred wolf demons with them. They could only reduce the pressure on Xiao Yu, but they could not help him completely escape from his predicament. Ordinary wolf demons were basically no threat to Xiao Yu. His strong physique allowed him to be unafraid of the claws and teeth of ordinary wolf demons without using any defensive Dharma treasures. And every time the silver moon broken saber was brandished, he could easily kill at least one wolf demon. He was like a god of death. Everywhere he passed, there were wolf demon corpses with their heads cut off. The reason why Xiao Yu had rushed out was not because she hoped to completely escape, but because she wanted to find a more suitable place to hide. There wasn't much time left for him. The four phantom monsters could only hold on for another hour. After an hour, Xiao Yu saw a large valley. The valley was naturally surrounded by mountains on all sides. Not only was the entrance very narrow, but it was also blocked by a large iron gate. Xiao Yu's eyesight was sharper. As he approached the valley, he realized that there were cultivators on guard at the top of the mountains on all sides of the valley. It was obvious that there were many cultivators gathered in the valley. Xiao Yu had rushed over here because he realized that the wolf pack in this direction was thinner. Moreover, the wolf pack seemed to be a little hesitant when they moved over. The cultivators on guard at the top of the mountains on all sides should have seen a large number of wolf demons rushing over here. The sound of the alarm became louder, and more cultivators gathered at the top of the mountains. The wolf pack chased after Xiao Yu, and the flying beasts in the sky also flew after the wolf pack. The scene was extremely spectacular and terrifying. Xiao Yu led the wolf pack to the front of the valley very quickly. However, the cultivators did not open the gate to Xiao Yu. Instead, countless locust-like fire arrows flew over from the direction of the valley. Those fire arrows were like sharp spears, but their bodies were covered in flames. When they fell, they gave Xiao Yu a heavy sense of oppression. In front of so many cultivators, Xiao Yu would not easily use his sage weapon to defend himself. Thinking that his body was of high quality, he waved his silver moon-broken saber to deflect the fire arrows that were falling towards him as he moved towards the gate of the valley. There were too many fire arrows falling from the sky. No matter how nimble Xiao Yu was, it was inevitable that he would be hit. However, after being weakened by his aura and the primordial flame, those fire arrows that landed on his body only caused him slight pain. No matter how rich the cultivators in the valley were, they could not refine all these fire arrows into high-grade divine weapons. These fire arrows were only slightly more powerful because of their sturdiness and speed. The wolf demons did not have as strong a body as Xiao Yu, nor did they have a strong aura or primordial flame. When they were hit by the fire arrows, most of them would be directly pierced through and nailed to the ground. Even if they were not nailed to the ground, they would be burned alive. Moreover, countless fire arrows were nailed to the ground. They connected together and formed a circle around the valley, creating a sea of fire that prevented the wolf demons from approaching. Although the fire on those fire arrows was not very powerful, they could easily ignite the wolf demon's fur. Moreover, the thick smoke emitted from the fire had a pungent smell, but it had the effect of numbing one's consciousness. It was also a powerful weapon against the wolf demons. Although the countless fire arrows did not avoid Xiao Yu and showed signs of killing Xiao Yu, they still helped Xiao Yu block the wolf demon's pursuit. Xiao Yu quickly ran to the gate of the mountain stronghold. However, the iron but very sturdy gate did not open for him. It was obvious that the stronghold did not welcome foreign cultivators. Xiao Yu naturally would not barge in. After all, he did not know what was going on inside, nor did he know if there were any strong cultivators inside. Therefore, he only stopped at the gate of the valley and waited for the wolf demons to retreat. Perhaps the fire arrows had taken too many wolf demons' lives, causing the silver-haired wolf demons to roar continuously. They were still like a raging tide of wolf demons to charge into the valley. There were still fire arrows falling from the sky. However, there were also huge fireballs rolling down from the mountain peaks around the valley, smashing and burning all the wolf demons that were charging in. Countless wolf demons gathered together like an ocean, and the valley was like a lone island in the middle of the ocean. The wolf demons launched wave after wave of attacks. It was like a torrential wave crashing into the lone island in the valley. However, no matter how hard they tried, they could not cross the lone island. The demonic wolves were not the only ones attacking the valley. Even the flying beasts had given up on attacking the demonic wolves. Instead, they were attacking the cultivators on the mountain peaks around the valley. What greeted them were fire dragons that shot into the sky. At this moment, dozens of huge braziers had appeared on the mountain peaks around the valley. The fire dragons flew out from those braziers. Those fire dragons flew into the sky and circled around spiritually. The scorching flames were actually able to ignite the feathers of the flying beasts. There were also many flying beasts in the sky. They circled densely in the sky, so it was naturally difficult for them to dodge the fire dragons. Therefore, the flying beasts that were bathed in fire flew randomly in the air, but they would also ignite the feathers of other flying beasts. Soon, the sky became a sea of fire, and the flying beasts that were burned to death or seriously injured by the fire continuously fell from the sky like a meteor shower. The pungent smell of the flames was accompanied by the fragrance of barbecued meat. The howls of the wolf demons were mixed with the sorrowful cries of the flying beasts. The surroundings of the valley became a world of fire. Countless flying beasts and wolf demons tragically left their lives here, and their corpses were burned to ashes by the fire. Xiao Yu really could not believe that all of this happened because of her. The wolf demons still did not retreat, and the flying beasts were still dodging the fire dragons as they swooped down to the mountain peak. Even if the cultivators in the valley could win this battle, they would definitely consume a lot of energy, and many cultivators would even lose their lives. In order to share the pressure of the cultivators in the valley, Xiao Yu also rested for a while before waving the silver moon broken blade to kill the wolf demons again. There were no more fire arrows shooting from the valley, and no more fireballs rolling down. It was estimated that the cultivators' reserves were limited. Without the threat of fire arrows and fireballs, the attack of the wolf demons became even more violent. If it were not for the fire dragons restricting the flying beasts, the wolf demons would have probably already attacked to the top of the mountain. The curtain of night gradually fell, and darkness quietly shrouded the earth. Not knowing whether it was because of the darkness, or because the price they paid for attacking for a long time was too heavy, the flying beasts began to gradually retreat. When all the flying beasts retreated from the battlefield, the fire dragons that were originally shooting into the sky were transferred to the wolf pack, causing the crazy charging wolf pack to suffer even more casualties. Another 2 hours passed like this. Under the leadership of the few silver-haired wolf demons, the wolf pack also gradually retreated after letting out waves of unwilling and angry howls. Xiaoling Yu and the cultivators in the valley at the same time relaxed a lot. After waiting for a while, Xiaoling Yu left the position of the valley's gate and fled far away, finding a hidden place not far from the valley to hide. It was not until midnight that the gate of the valley slowly opened. A group of cultivators walked out and then scattered. After this group of cultivators came out, they began to clean up the battlefield. They pulled out a forest of iron spears from the ground and put the wolf demons' corpses that were still intact into the storage magic weapon. It took a full 2 hours for those cultivators to return one after another and close the big iron gate of the valley again. Xiaoling Yu did not go to contact those cultivators because this time the wolf demons and flying beasts launched a surprise attack on the valley, and those cultivators must have seen her before. If she went over at this time, they would definitely not be happy, and it might even be disadvantageous to her. Chapter 496. 3 days later, the gate to the valley opened again. Groups of cultivators walked out of the valley and quietly divided into several groups. Each group chose a direction and hurried towards the mountain forest. Xiaoling Yu was curious and followed a group from afar. He wanted to see what they would do after leaving the valley. As for the inside of the valley, Xiaoling Yu would not easily enter before he understood the situation. The group that Xiaoling Yu was following had a total of nearly 30 people. Seeing how familiar they were with the mountain forest, Xiaoling Yu knew that they must have lived and cultivated in this mountain forest for a long time. However, the cultivation level of these cultivators was more or less the same as Xiaoling Yu. There were even 3 cultivators who looked very young. Their cultivation level was even lower than Xiaoling Yu's. They were only equivalent to the revered level of the immortal, devil, and demon realms. If these cultivators were placed in the immortal, devil, and demon realms, they would all be top experts. However, in the realm of the gods, they should be the lowest level existences. After following this group for more than 4 hours, the group of cultivators finally stopped. Then, they sat together and set up a bonfire. They took out pieces of raw meat and roasted it around the bonfire. The aroma of the meat grew stronger. Those cultivators who looked strong took out some wine and began to eat and drink. The strange thing was, since they were in such a good mood, why did they not make a sound when they were eating and drinking together? What made Xiaoling Yu feel even more strange was that at his level of cultivation, he would feel a little gluttonous and even a little hungry when he saw others eating and drinking. The more he watched others eat and drink, the more Xiaoling Yu felt that his stomach was empty. He had a feeling that he also needed to eat and drink. This feeling made Xiaoling Yu feel extremely absurd. He was an invincible cultivator in the 3 realms. Why would he need to eat and drink? For a long time, Xiaoling Yu had a mindset that was cultivators did not need to eat and drink. Even if they ate and drank, it was only to satisfy their appetite. It was only to pass the time. Xiaoling Yu felt that it was because he had been watching others eat and drink, so he shifted his gaze and attention away. Then, he sat cross-legged under a large blue stone and began to meditate to calm his mind. However, he soon realized that it was very difficult for him to enter a state of meditation. He kept feeling that something was wrong with his body. As for what was wrong, he couldn't tell. After the 30 cultivators finished eating and drinking, they got up one after another and continued on their way. However, Their current speed was clearly much slower than before. After a full day, these cultivators finally stopped. Not far in front of them was a dense forest that stretched as far as the eye could see. The only difference between a jungle and a mountain forest was that the trees in the jungle were denser, while the mountain forest was mostly barren and rocky. Waves of wolf howls could be heard coming from the dense forest. It seemed like there were more wolf demons inside. What are these cultivators doing here? Could it be that he wanted to hunt down those wolf demons? Xiao Yu was a little suspicious, but he did not act rashly. Instead, he hid well and continued to observe. Those cultivators did not directly enter the jungle. Instead, they found another place and set up a bonfire to roast raw meat. After another round of eating and drinking, they got up and entered the jungle. This time, while they were eating and drinking, Xiao Yu actually felt hungry again. At that time, he even had the urge to rush up and grab a few pieces of roasted meat to eat. Xiao Yu hesitated at this time whether he should follow them into the jungle. After thinking for a moment, although he felt that there was no need, he was still very curious. In the end, he quietly snuck into the jungle. Not only were the trees in the jungle dense, but there were also many knee-high weeds, shrubs, and thorns. There was no ready-made path at all. Xiao Yu followed the cultivator's tracks. He was worried that he would be discovered, so he kept a distance of more than 1,000 feet from them. Not long after, the sound of fighting and wolf howls could be heard. Xiao Yu immediately climbed up a big tree and looked forward. At this time, the nearly 30 cultivators encountered 3 wolf demons. They had an absolute advantage in terms of numbers. Naturally, they did not fall into a disadvantageous position. Each of them held their own weapons and gradually surrounded the 3 wolf demons. The battle ended in less than 100 breaths. The 3 wolf demons were all lying on the ground, and the cultivators were not injured at all. The leader put away the 3 dead wolf demons. Then, with a much faster speed than before, they moved to the left side of the original direction they were heading. After about the time it took to drink a cup of tea, they readjusted their direction and continued towards the depths of the forest. Xiao Yu had been carefully following them and tightly restrained his aura. Along the way, at irregular intervals, they would encounter different numbers of wolf demons. They killed more and more wolf demons, but a few of them also suffered some minor injuries. From these cultivators' mature and calm performance when dealing with the wolf demons, Xiao Yu could see that they were indeed here to hunt wolf demons. Moreover, they should have come here often to hunt wolf demons. Xiao Yu also found a situation. Every 20 hours, these cultivators would find a safe place to stop. They would find a few people to keep watch while the others set up a bonfire to roast meat. When these cultivators were eating meat and drinking wine, Xiao Yu could not help but gulp. The feeling of hunger was becoming more and more obvious, making him feel inexplicable. Before ascending to the Devil Realm, Xiao Yu had seen a lot of jade slips and ancient books that introduced the 3 realms. But this time, before ascending to the God Realm, he knew almost nothing about the God Realm. Therefore, he was very puzzled by these cultivators who were clearly not inferior to him in terms of cultivation. But he felt that there must be something behind it. After walking for 3 days, these cultivators finally stopped going deeper into the jungle. They began to move to the left side, as if they would encounter some big trouble if they went further. After so many days, Xiao Yu suddenly had a very bad feeling. His eyesight seemed to be getting worse and worse. Moreover, he did not suffer any injuries, but he actually felt weak. Xiao Yu deliberately stopped for a while. Then, when there was no one around and no wolf demons, he first rushed forward. After stopping, he punched a huge rock. What surprised him was that his eyesight had decreased by more than 30%, and his strength had also decreased by more than 30%. In addition to his eyesight and physical strength, even the range of his hearing and divine sense had decreased by a lot. These kinds of weakening had unknowingly caused Xiao Yu's battle strength to decrease by more than 30%. What's going on? While Xiao Yu was surprised, he began to ponder. Could it be because of hunger? Xiao Yu suddenly came to a realization. He slapped his thigh and suddenly said, "No wonder they all eat." It turns out that it's to maintain their strength. Thinking of this, Xiaolingyu followed the group of cultivators again. While following them, he carefully observed their condition. After a period of observation, Xiaolingyu discovered that these cultivators were in their best condition after eating and drinking, and their battle strength was also the strongest. But as time passed, after maintaining their peak condition for a while, they began to gradually weaken. After about 20 hours, the cultivators' condition began to rapidly decline. Then, they decisively stopped and found a place to eat and drink. These findings also confirmed Xiaolingyu's previous conjecture. His expression became strange. Their cultivation is similar to mine. They can only last for 10 hours, but I can last for several days. Why is that? Could it be because my body is stronger? Xiaolingyu rubbed his chin and thought for a while. Then, he decided to get himself something to eat first. He didn't want to starve to death for no reason after surviving the chaos, divine tribulation, and coming to the God realm. When the cultivators stopped to eat and drink again, Xiaolingyu snuck to the side. When he was far away from the cultivators, he created a big commotion around him. Not long after, a few wolf demons were lured over. These wolf demons' cultivation was very ordinary. Although Xiaolingyu wasn't in his peak condition, he still finished the battle in 3 breaths. Learning the techniques of the cultivators, he used the silver moon-broken blade to cut off one of the wolf demon's legs. Then, he removed the fur and used the chaos primordial fire to ignite a pile of dry branches. The wolf meat didn't taste very good. Perhaps it was because Xiaolingyu didn't have any seasoning. However, after eating 3 wolf legs, Xiaolingyu clearly felt that his condition was gradually recovering. He was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, he found a safe place to hide and sat down cross-legged. After the wolf meat entered his stomach, it was slowly digested, just like the ordinary food Xiaolingyu had eaten before. However, the difference was that the wolf meat would turn into waves of life essence. The cultivator didn't need to refine it, and it could be used directly on the cultivator's body. Ordinary wolf demons were similar to Xiaolingyu's cultivation. Naturally, their flesh contained a lot of life essence. It would be very nourishing for cultivators of the same cultivation level. When did I lose so much life essence? And I didn't even notice it? Xiaolingyu muttered to himself in astonishment. After many days in the realm of the gods, Xiaolingyu realized that the life essence of cultivators in the realm of the gods was constantly being depleted. It was the same even if there were no battles. At least, this was the case for ordinary cultivators in the realm of the gods. As for powerful experts, Xiaolingyu didn't know. As for why the life essence of cultivators was constantly being depleted, Xiaolingyu still couldn't find a reason. However, he would find out in the future. After Xiaolingyu recovered, he went to find the group of cultivators again. However, when he arrived at the original place, he only saw the ashes of a bonfire. Chapter 497. Those cultivators have been wandering around in the dense forest. They constantly encountered and fought with wolf demons and kept the wolf demons that they killed. Occasionally, they would also collect some medicinal herbs and wild fruits. They were very much like hunters in the secular world. After following them for a few months, Xiaolingyu felt that it was too boring. He originally planned to stop following them and find something else to do. However, just as he was about to leave, those cultivators suddenly found a strange flower that could run. That strange flower was not very tall. It was only about 1 foot tall and only had a few small flower petals that looked like white dots. When those cultivators saw this strange flower, they were very excited. However, when they surrounded the strange flower, it strangely jumped out of their encirclement. Then, it kept running away as if it was teleporting. The strange flower's speed was not very fast. Every time it moved, it could only jump about 500 feet. However, its movement was very erratic and unpredictable. Therefore, the nearly 30 cultivators were unable to surround it. They were unable to make it stay, but they were also unable to shake it off. Those cultivators must have recognized that strange flower and knew that it was very precious. Therefore, They kept chasing it and were unwilling to give up easily. However, that strange flower took a detour and gradually went deeper into the dense forest. Those cultivators originally did not want or dare to go deeper into the dense forest. However, after a short conversation, they braced themselves and continued to chase after that strange flower. Xiaoling Yu also felt that the strange flower was a little interesting. Therefore, he temporarily gave up on the idea of leaving and followed closely behind the group of cultivators. Those cultivators' attention was almost completely attracted by that strange flower. They did not notice Xiao Lingyu's existence. The strange thing was that this dense forest that was occupied by the wolf demons actually became extremely quiet as they went deeper in. The howls of the wolves were also rarely heard. After chasing for about 2 days, that strange flower was still running away. At this time, it had already reached the side of a small stream. The strange flower continued to run along the stream and finally stopped in front of a small waterfall. Not only did the strange flower stop, but the cultivators also stopped. Xiaoling Yu was secretly puzzled. Since the strange flower had already stopped, why didn't those cultivators quickly surround it? After looking around carefully, Xiaoling Yu was surprised to find that there was a relatively large green rock beside the small waterfall, not far ahead. And on the large green rock, there was a silver-haired wolf demon lying on it. Xiaoling Yu had witnessed the strength of this silver-haired wolf demon. If he did not use his sacred weapon, he estimated that he would not be able to fight it head-on. Even Xiaoling Yu was a little afraid of this silver-furred demon wolf, let alone these cultivators who were at the same level as Xiaoling Yu. The strange flower seemed to have some intelligence. It seemed to have realized that the silver-haired wolf demon was not to be trifled with. Therefore, it paused while it was fleeing. Less than 10 breaths after everyone arrived, the silver-haired wolf that seemed to be sleeping suddenly opened its eyes slowly. The silver-haired wolf demon first glanced at the group of cultivators not far away, then turned its gaze away indifferently and stared at the strange flower. The strange flower stopped for 20 breaths. After being stared at by the silver-haired wolf demon, it changed its direction and quickly moved away. Roar! The silver-haired wolf demon let out a long howl and suddenly stood up. Its 4 claws dug into the large green rock, and its body turned into a silver light and shot out. So fast, Xiaoling Yu exclaimed when he saw the silver light flash and cover more than 1,000 feet in a flash. The nearly 30 cultivators hesitated at this moment. On one hand, they wanted to get the strange flower, but on the other hand, they were afraid of the silver-haired wolf demon's strength. At this moment, they were a little hesitant. However, they still made a decision before Xiaoling Yu moved and chased after it together. Xiaoling Yu naturally followed closely behind. He was not very afraid of the silver-haired wolf demon. The silver-haired wolf demon's speed was extremely fast. It only used a few breaths of time to catch up with the strange flower and use its claws to pull it out by the roots. What was surprising was that under the strange flower, there was a ginseng. The ginseng was constantly twisting its body, like a rabbit that was caught by its ears. It kept struggling, but was unable to break free. The silver-haired wolf demon was about to swallow the ginseng, but more than 10 rays of light bombarded it. It had no choice but to temporarily give up the idea and pull up its body from the ground. More than 10 rays of light bombarded the place where the silver-haired wolf demon was just at, flattening the vegetation within a radius of 10 feet. However, it did not injure the silver-haired wolf demon. Xiaoling Yu had already discovered that the same attack in the immortal, devil, and demon realms was clearly more powerful than in the god realm. The space pressure in the god realm was too strong. It weakened the power of the cultivator's techniques and magic weapons. Even the silver-haired wolf demon did not seem to be able to stay in the air for long. After it jumped up high, it fell down again. However, just as it touched the ground again, it aimed at a cultivator and suddenly pounced. That cultivator did not dodge. When the silver-haired wolf demon was about to pounce on him, a shield suddenly appeared in front of him. The shield seemed to be made of iron. It looked very thick and solid. It almost completely covered the cultivator from head to toe. The silver-haired wolf demon's two front claws fiercely slammed on the shield. It directly pushed down the shield and the cultivator behind it. Before the silver-haired wolf demon could make another move, 7 or 8 sharp swords flashed with cold light and quickly pierced towards it. The silver-haired wolf demon did not dare to take those sharp swords head-on. It immediately jumped up again. However, this time, just as it jumped up, there were crossbow arrows that pierced through the air and shot toward its body that was suspended in the air. It was a little difficult to move in the air. At least, the silver-haired wolf demon was in the air of the divine realm. In addition, there were as many as 15 crossbow bolts. Even if it tried its best to dodge, it was inevitable that 4 of them would hit its body. Fortunately, the 4 crossbow bolts didn't hit any vital areas. Furthermore, 3 of the bolts were repelled by its fur, and only one of them pierced into its back. The silver-haired wolf demon landed on the ground again. However, the anger in its eyes was very obvious. Its whole body's aura began to madly rise. A gust of wind also began to wreak havoc with its body as the center. It was very obvious that this silver-haired wolf demon was going to flip out. The pain from its butt made it forget to swallow the ginseng. It furiously increased its aura, and then, with a gust of wind, it once again pounced towards another cultivator. But this time, 4 cultivators quickly stood in the direction of the silver-haired wolf king. Moreover, they all had shields in front of them. Among them, 2 of them stood in front of the wolf demon, while the other 2 stood on the left and right. The cultivators on the left and right sides each held a shield in one hand and a sword in the other. The 2 cultivators facing the silver-haired wolf demon held their shields with both hands and looked like they were going to use all their strength to resist. As expected, the silver-haired wolf demon still pounced on the 2 cultivators standing in front of it. However, the 2 cultivators on the left and right sides quickly stabbed the silver-haired wolf demon's eyes with their sharp swords. This time, the silver-haired wolf demon did not have time to jump up again. 2 sharp swords pierced its vital points. It had no choice but to dodge. At this time, the fastest and most effective dodge it could make was to sink its head down. But when its head sank down, the spine at the back of its neck replaced its 2 eyes to bear the attack of the 2 sharp swords. Although the silver-haired wolf demon's fur defense was very strong, the 2 sharp swords were also very sharp. Not everyone could bear the attack of the sharp swords with their flesh and blood. The 2 sharp swords directly pierced the silver-haired wolf demon's fur and went 3 inches deep. Roar! The silver-haired wolf demon immediately raised its head and opened its mouth to spit out a silver divine light. The silver divine light blasted towards the cultivator on the left. However, the cultivator seemed to have known that he would be attacked. He didn't even pull back his sword. Instead, he jumped to the side, causing the silver divine light to miss its target. Instead, it blasted a row of trees into sawdust that filled the sky. Although these cultivators were much weaker than the silver-haired wolf demon, they clearly knew the silver-haired wolf demon very well. Moreover, they also had a set of more effective methods to deal with the silver-haired wolf demon. After being hit twice in succession, the silver-haired wolf demon was naturally burning with anger. But after it spat out that divine light, the other 20 cultivators attacked again. However, the silver-haired wolf demon had already jumped up and did not fall again. Instead, it jumped onto the branch of a big tree. Those cultivators shot their crossbows again, but the silver-haired wolf demon quickly jumped onto another big tree. At the same time, in the process of flying, it spat out a silver divine light. There were 3 cultivators in the vicinity of the silver divine light's attack. They quickly dodged to the side, but one of the cultivators, who was only at the venerable realm, had one of his legs blown off because his reaction was half a beat too slow. The silver-haired wolf demon still did not stay on the big tree for long. After a moment, it jumped out again, causing the crossbow arrows to miss. Following that, the silver-haired wolf demon displayed extraordinary strength. It continuously jumped around the trees, causing the attacks of the cultivators to all miss. Occasionally, it would shoot out a silver divine light, causing the formation of the cultivators to become chaotic and increasing the casualties of the cultivators. In less than 10 minutes, there were already 7 or 8 cultivators who were injured. There were even 3 cultivators who were directly blown up by the silver divine light. The silver-haired wolf demon only had 1 more crossbow arrow and a few more sword wounds on its body. The key was that the silver-haired wolf demon had completely taken the initiative. Even if it could not win, it could still escape at any time. What made Shaoling Yu feel strange was that even though the situation was so unfavorable, those cultivators were still persevering. Next, Shaoling Yu noticed something. The silver-furred wolf Yao's movement speed seemed to have slowed considerably. Additionally, its ability to sense danger had also fallen considerably. On the other hand, the accuracy rate of the cultivator's attacks was slowly increasing. The silver-haired wolf demon should have realized this, but it was not in a hurry. It still tried to dodge and attack at the same time. Chapter 498. After fighting for another 10 minutes, the silver-haired wolf demon finally couldn't hold on anymore. Perhaps it didn't want to fight anymore. It flashed and began to flee into the distance. At this time, there were only 15 people left in the group of cultivators. Most of them were injured. Although they had defeated the silver-haired wolf demon, they didn't have any actual gains. Moreover, they suffered heavy losses. However, the silver-haired wolf demon was faster than any of them. If they had fled just now, not only would they have been defeated by the silver-haired wolf demon, but even if they had left this area, they would have been attacked by other silver-haired wolf demons along the way. They might have suffered even greater losses. Perhaps they shouldn't have come so far in the first place. Perhaps they shouldn't have chased after the silver-haired wolf demon. They shouldn't have been greedy for that strange flower. With such great losses, the group of cultivators naturally wouldn't give up so easily. They endured the pain and chased after the silver-haired wolf demon. Shaoling Yu was even more confused. Although the silver-haired wolf demon's condition continued to deteriorate, if it really went all out, even if the group of cultivators were lucky enough to obtain the final victory, it was estimated that more than half of the remaining 15 people would die. Paying such a huge price for a strange flower, was it worth it? Shaoling Yu naturally had to follow to see what was going on. After all, they had already seen this much, so there was no harm in watching a few more times. At first, the silver-haired wolf demon's speed was still very fast. However, it gradually slowed down, and the distance between it and the 15 people was also shortened. Shaoling Yu could see that the reason why the silver-haired wolf demon's speed decreased so much was definitely not because of hunger. There must be other reasons. Seeing that the blood flowing out of the silver-haired wolf demon's wounds had turned from dark red to dark green, Shaoling Yu suddenly realized that the arrows and sharp swords were actually dipped in poison. Moreover, it was a strong poison that was effective against the silver-haired wolf demon. As the strong poison gradually took effect, the silver-haired wolf demon's condition naturally deteriorated rapidly. That was why the cultivators had persisted until now, waiting for it to be poisoned. As the silver-haired wolf demon moved forward, its body was already shaking. It seemed that it would not be long before it was caught. After about the time it took to brew a cup of tea, although the silver-haired demon wolf had not been caught by the 15 cultivators, it had already fallen to the ground first, and its body was twitching uncontrollably. Just as the silver-furred wolf demon fell, before the 15 cultivators could surround it, a group of unknown cultivators suddenly rushed over from the front. Fortunately, the 15 cultivators were able to reach the side of the silver-furred wolf demon first. However, the cultivators on the other side were also shooting streaks of light at them. Among the 15 cultivators, 5 of them stood at the front, using their shields to block the streams of light. The other 10 cultivators took action to end the silver-furred demon wolf's life. They also collected the corpse of the silver-furred demon wolf and the ginseng. With a series of explosions, the shields in the hands of the 5 cultivators in front were blown away in all directions. They also spat out mouthfuls of blood as they were sent flying far away. They only stopped after crashing into a few small trees. Their faces were extremely pale. At this moment, Xiao Yu noticed that the group of cultivators who had been fighting with the silver-furred demon wolf for a long time were all wearing what looked like iron armor, while the group of cultivators who had just arrived were wearing what looked like silver armor. Now that the two groups of people were standing face to face, they gave off a completely different feeling. It was obvious that they were not on the same side. What is the meaning of this? One of the armored cultivators walked out and asked angrily. The other cultivators in silver armor quickly surrounded the armored cultivators. Then one of them stood out and said in a tone that could not be refused, "Leave behind the Wolf King and the ginseng or die." That person's reply not only caused the armored cultivators' expressions to change greatly, but also caused Xiao Yu to frown slightly. "No, absolutely not. In order to kill this Wolf King, more than 10 of our Lingu Valley people have already died. This Wolf King and the ginseng are what we deserve." One of the armored cultivators firmly refused. If you don't give it to us, your losses will be even greater." The silver-armored cultivator laughed non-committally. There were a total of 30 silver-armored cultivators, and all of them were in good condition. Although their cultivation was similar to the armored cultivators, they had an obvious advantage at this moment. The armored cultivators' expressions became even more gloomy. After a moment of hesitation, a relatively young armored cultivator suddenly shouted, "Fight them to the death. Even if we die, we won't let them have an easy time." The young armored cultivator's shout was followed by the majority of the armored cultivators. This group of armored cultivators fought to the end and paid such a heavy price to obtain the Wolf King and the ginseng. Naturally, they would not be willing to hand it over to others. Not only did the words of the silver-armored cultivators make them feel sullen, it also provoked their dignity. "We definitely won't give the Wolf King and the ginseng to you for free," but the armored cultivator first pretended to negotiate, then suddenly shouted, "Attack!" The armored cultivators had a tacit understanding. As soon as the word "attack" was shouted, they raised their arms at the same time and shot out crossbow bolts, whistling through the air towards the silver-armored cultivators. Although the silver-armored cultivators were prepared, the crossbow bolts were too fast and the distance between them was very close. It was inevitable that some of them were caught off guard and were hit. On the spot, a silver-armored cultivator's head exploded, and 2 others had their chests pierced. "You're courting death." The smile on the silver-armored cultivator's face instantly disappeared. Instead, he looked a little ferocious. He shouted angrily, "Kill! Leave no one alive." The 20-plus silver-armored cultivators who weren't hit immediately took out their weapons and silver shields. Then, they charged towards the iron-armored cultivator. The silver-armored cultivators had the advantage in terms of numbers and condition. In less than 2 breaths of time, they had already killed 2 of the more heavily injured armored cultivators. Xiao Yu pondered for a moment, then jumped out of the bushes she was hiding in and flew into the battlefield. A cold light flashed, and the silver moon saber drew an arc. A silver-armored cultivator's head flew high into the air. A silver-armored cultivator's spear was about to pierce the chest of an armored cultivator, but the arm he used to thrust the spear with was chopped off by cold light. A silver-armored cultivator's saber was about to land on an iron-armored cultivator's head when his abdomen was pierced by a broken saber. The nascent soul in his dantian was mercilessly scattered in the next moment. After Xiao Yu entered the battlefield, he began to help the armored cultivators defend. He was in good condition and drifted in and out of the crowd like a ghost. Wherever he went, silver-armored cultivators fell into pools of blood one after another. After killing nearly 10 silver-armored cultivators, Xiao Yu felt that if he continued killing like this, it would not be beneficial to his future plans. Therefore, he slowed down and let the silver-armored cultivators who had already noticed his presence have a chance to hit him. However, what made Xiao Yu depressed was that although these silver-armored cultivators looked very arrogant, none of their weapons could break through his body's defenses. Xiao Yu had originally planned to keep a low profile and let himself suffer some superficial wounds. However, the silver-armored cultivators' attacks were a little too weak. However, Xiao Yu himself could break through the silver-armored cultivators' defenses. As he moved quickly, he used the silver moon saber to create a few bloody wounds on his body. Then, he was soon covered in blood. Although his body was covered in blood, he still moved like the wind. He looked very much like a warrior bathed in blood. In the eyes of the armored cultivators, they were naturally extremely grateful and impressed. Of course, they were also very curious. This cultivator who suddenly appeared did not look like someone from their village. Why would he help them? Xiao Yu's appearance naturally turned the situation around. After leaving behind more than 20 corpses, the rest of the silver-armored cultivators ran away like rats. There were only 12 of them left on the armored cultivators' side. Moreover, all of them were covered in wounds and were in a weakened state. However, they still forced their shaky bodies to move closer to Xiao Yu, wanting to thank him first. But by the time those armored cultivators surrounded them, the person they wanted to thank had already fallen to the ground. The 12 armored cultivators surrounded Xiao Yu, who was pretending to be unconscious. After they looked at Xiao Yu again and again, they were sure that Xiao Yu was definitely not from their village. One of them said, "He should be too heavily injured and might not have eaten for many days. We have to quickly carry him back to the village to treat his injuries. Otherwise, he will die here." This person's suggestion naturally received the approval of all the armored cultivators. They first carried Xiao Yu away from the battlefield. Then, they found a place to roast some meat. Just as they were starting to recover, they carried Xiao Yu out of the forest as fast as they could. Along the way, they kept dripping fresh fruit juice into Xiao Yu's mouth. Although the 12 of them had done their best, they were always blocked by some wolf demons along the way. It took them a total of 5 days to return to the entrance of the valley. "Open the door quickly! Open the door quickly! We're back!" One of the armored cultivators shouted anxiously as he banged on the big iron door. When the other armored cultivators returned, they had already been discovered by the cultivators on the mountain peaks around the valley. Therefore, the door was quickly opened. After the door was opened, 2 cultivators who looked relatively young came forward to welcome them. They did not look very happy and did not look like they were welcoming heroes back to their home. Moreover, one of them expressionlessly pointed at Xiao Yu, who was lying flat on a stretcher, and asked, "I don't remember this person in your group. I also don't remember who he is in our Lingu Valley. Are you going to bring him in too?" One of the armored cultivators replied, "Shiwei, you can rest assured. This person became like this because he saved our lives. We are only bringing him into the village to treat his injuries to repay our kindness." Chapter 499. Shiwei's question infuriated the 12 armored cultivators, but they didn't know how to answer it. Xiao Yu had actually been conscious the whole time. His plan was to save these armored cultivators, then pretend to be seriously injured and unconscious. Then, he would have a chance to sneak into the village. Of course, he didn't have any bad intentions when he sneaked into the village. He just wanted to have a chance to interact with people and learn more about the realm of the gods. However, he didn't expect that being carried to the entrance of the village in such a state would arouse suspicion. If there's something wrong with him, why would he save our lives? One of the armored cultivators asked. That's right. If there's nothing wrong with him, why would he save you? Is it just out of kindness? Shiwei asked. You can't stop us from bringing him into the village just because you suspect that there's something wrong with him, right? If there's nothing wrong with him, it would be ungrateful of us to stop him from entering the village, one of the armored cultivators said calmly. You all know that this is a special time for our village. Last time, those wolf demons and birds attacked us together, causing us to suffer heavy losses. It's not a good time to bring an unknown cultivator into the village. If he's here to spy on us, we'll be in trouble, Shiwei said confidently. This is just a suspicion. There's no proof. I think you're overthinking it, Shiwei, one of the armored cultivators said. Haha, Kong Ping, if he's really a spy and you bring him into the village, he'll leave after getting the information he wants. Then, he'll bring great losses to the Lingu Valley. Can you bear the responsibility? Shiwei asked the armored cultivator with a smile. The armored cultivator called Kong Ping thought for a moment, then said firmly, Although I can't bear the responsibility, I can use my life as a guarantee. If he's a spy, I'm willing to die as an apology. We're all willing to guarantee it. The other 11 armored cultivators echoed. In the eyes of these armored cultivators, their lives have been saved by this person. If worst came to worst, they would just return it to him. Before they could confirm this cultivator lying on the stretcher was their benefactor. Even if you're willing to guarantee it, I can't. I have to be responsible for the entire village, Shiwei said coldly. Then we can only ask the village chief to make a decision. As Kong Ping spoke, he entered the valley alone. In just 10 minutes, Kong Ping had already returned to the Iron Gate, and he even invited a white-haired and white-bearded old man over. This old man should be the village chief of the Linggu Valley. When he reached the door, he first sized up Xiaoling Yu, then said to Shi Weiyan, "Carry him into the village first." But village chief, Shi Wei clearly felt that something was amiss. Just get someone to keep a close eye on him. Don't let him walk around the village while he's recuperating. Once his injuries are healed, just send him out of the village, the village chief instructed. Then, he turned around and left, not giving Shi Wei a chance to speak. Since the village head had spoken, Shi Wei naturally didn't dare to continue blocking the door. He could only watch as the 12 armored cultivators carried Xiaoling Yu into the village. In the valley, surrounded by mountains on all sides, there weren't many buildings. There were only thatched cottages, wooden buildings, and stone buildings. Moreover, they weren't built very high. Outside the valley, there was danger everywhere. There were many wolf demons and birds that constantly threatened the safety of travelers. However, inside the valley, it was very peaceful. Although the villagers were also in a hurry, their expressions were very relaxed. After the 12 armored cultivators entered the valley, they were surrounded by many people. There were children and women among these people. Their faces were filled with obvious concern, as if they were the armored cultivators' family members. There were no eyes here, but he could hear everyone's conversation. He suddenly felt that this was very different from the realm of the gods that he had imagined. It was more like a village in the secular world near a forest, and the people in this village made a living by hunting. Xiaoling Yu was carried to a stone house in a corner of the valley, then placed on a stone bed. The stone bed was covered with a soft animal skin, and it was quite comfortable to lie on. You all stay here and watch. I'll go get Yueru's medicine master to treat him. After Kong Ping said this, he left the stone house. Not long after, Kong Ping returned, but there was an additional girl beside him who looked like she was in her late teens. Medicine Master Yueru, do you think he can still be saved? He's already been injured and unconscious for several days. Kong Ping pointed at Xiaoling Yu on the stone bed and asked. Although Yueru looked young, she was very calm. She stood in front of the bed for a while, and her eyebrows furrowed even tighter. This made the 12 armored cultivators more and more nervous. After looking for a while, Yueru swept her sleeves across Xiaoling Yu's body, and a light blue screen of light enveloped Xiaoling Yu's body. Then, Xiaoling Yu felt a gentle energy seeping into his body. The comfortable feeling made him want to moan. The blue screen of light gradually disappeared, and Yueru said to Kong Ping, "His injuries aren't serious. He'll be fine after a few days of rest." When Kong Ping heard this, he was delighted at first, but then he said in surprise, "He's already unconscious, and he hasn't eaten for several days." "How?" Yueru interrupted him and asked, "Do you doubt my diagnosis?" Kong Ping quickly waved his hand and said, No, that's not what I meant. Medicine Master Yueru's diagnosis can't be wrong." Yueru did not say anything else and immediately left the stone house. However, before she left, she glanced sideways at Xiaoling Yu, and the corners of her mouth curled into a mysterious smile that was intriguing. After treating Xiaoling Yu, Yueru first found the village chief in the village and said, "There's something wrong with the person who was just carried into the village. I suspect that he's pretending to be unconscious because his injuries are all superficial. It's not enough for him to faint. Moreover, he clearly hasn't eaten for several days, but his body's condition hasn't weakened by much. Haha, no matter how cunning a fox is, it will eventually show its tail. Let's wait and see. We'll just keep an eye on it, the village chief said calmly with a smile. Yuru frowned and went back to her room. On the second day after entering the Lingu Valley, Xiao Lingyu pretended to wake up. He knew that he was still being doubted, and he also knew that the medicine master named Yuru had most likely seen through his true injuries. However, he still had to continue pretending. Benefactor, you're finally awake. Kong Ping saw that Xiao Lingyu had opened his eyes and hurriedly went forward to speak. Where am I? Xiao Lingyu's face was pale, and he still sounded weak when he spoke. You're now in the Lingu Valley, Kong Ping replied in a low voice. Oh, I'm a little hungry. Xiao Lingyu nodded and said, That's right, you haven't eaten for many days. I'll get you some food now. Kong Ping patted himself on the head, then turned and walked away. There was no one else in the stone house. After Kong Ping left, Xiao Lingyu slowly sat on the edge of the bed. Then, he stood up and walked to the door. In front of the stone house, there was a small pond. The lotus leaves were tender and green, and the fragrance of the lotus flowers was enchanting. The fragrance of the flowers also assailed the nostrils. There was nothing special about the stone house. There was only a medicine garden beside it, and it seemed that there were many divine herbs in it. If these divine herbs were placed in the immortal, devil, and demon realms, they would all be treasures. However, in the Lingu Valley of the God Realm, there wasn't even a single person to look after them. Looking further into the distance, one could see that in the valley, as well as the surrounding hills, there were many fruit trees. The fruits on the trees were fresh and attractive. Xiao Lingyu didn't walk around carelessly. He stood at the door of the stone house and looked for a while. Then, he returned to the house and laid down on the bed. Not long after, Kong Ping returned. However, the medicine master Yuru also followed him in. Kong Ping brought some wine and dishes and placed them on the table. Then, he helped Xiao Lingyu to the table and sat him down. Your injuries are no longer serious. Rest for a few days and you will recover. As Yuru spoke, he took out a small jade bottle from his storage treasure. Then, he said, Here are a few medicinal pills that nourish the body. Take one pill every day. It will help you quickly replenish the life essence that you have lost. Thank you. Xiao Lingyu didn't refuse. He took the jade bottle and immediately opened it. He poured out an emerald green medicinal pill and swallowed it. The medicinal pill melted in his mouth. Waves of cooling medicinal power quickly spread throughout his body. Xiao Lingyu's face was originally a little pale and gloomy. However, after the medicinal pill entered his stomach, his cheeks immediately regained some color. His dry and cracked lips also gradually became rosy. You recover really quickly, Yueru said calmly. It's the medicine master's divine medicinal pill that's good, Xiao Lingyu replied calmly. Yueru didn't argue. He immediately stood up and took his leave. Xiao Lingyu began to eat and drink. At the same time, he chatted with Kong Ping intermittently. Xiao Lingyu and Kong Ping only talked about the situation in the realm of the gods. They didn't talk about the Lingu Valley. At most, they talked about the wolf packs and flying beasts around the valley. As long as it didn't involve the Lingu Valley, Kong Ping naturally said whatever he knew. Moreover, what he said was also what everyone knew. Through Kong Ping's introduction, Xiao Lingyu finally understood a little about the realm of the gods. However, Kong Ping's cultivation wasn't high, so he didn't know much about the realm of the gods. This was indeed the realm of the gods. Kong Ping had also ascended from the lower realm a long time ago. Before Kong Ping ascended, the Lingu Valley had already existed. Moreover, it was said that it had existed for countless years. In fact, there were many such villages around the Lingu Valley. Many cultivators who ascended from the lower realm would be guided by the multicolored light and dropped around these villages. Then, cultivators who had just ascended could join these villages and seek protection. The cultivators in these villages were, in fact, the lowest level of existence in the realm of the gods. Only when they reached a certain level of cultivation could they leave the village and go to other places. Only when they reached a certain level of cultivation could they fly in the realm of the gods without eating for long periods of time. As for what level they had to reach, Kong Ping wasn't very clear. Chapter 500. Of course, there were definitely more villages in the God Realm. However, not every cultivator could fully appreciate the scenery of the God Realm, especially those who had just ascended to the God Realm. They would often spend many years circling around a small village. But for the realm of the cultivators in the divine realm, the cultivators who ascended from the three realms would know from the ancient books in the village. Sometimes the village chief would also tell them a bit. The realm of the cultivators in the divine realm from low to high are deity, great god, sky god, monarch god, god king, god emperor, and saint god. A deity is a deity-level cultivator who has yet to undergo the divine tribulation. Their strength is similar to the honorable level cultivators of the immortal, devil, and demon realms. And a great deity is a realm that has just undergone the divine tribulation. It is also the realm that Shaolin Yu and Kong Ping are at now. Most of the cultivators in many villages in the divine realm are at this realm. The highest cultivation in the Linggu Valley is the old village chief, but he's only at the late stage of great god, and no one knows how long he has been cultivating. Cultivators who have passed the divine tribulation are theoretically immortal, but this is on the premise that you don't have to worry about food and don't encounter any danger. In order to ensure that they could eat, in order to survive in the immortal realm without dying, the cultivators had to go out of their villages to hunt. However, hunting was dangerous. If they were not careful, they could die. As such, it would be a joke for them to say that they were immortal. Generally speaking, deity-level cultivators would need to eat once every 12 to 12 hours, while great gods would need to eat every 24 hours. If they didn't eat in time, their body condition would continue to deteriorate. If their body condition deteriorated to a certain extent and the cultivator still didn't eat, then the cultivator's life essence energy would flow faster until the cultivator turned into ashes. So, the most important task of the cultivators in the divine realm is not to cultivate hard, but to ensure that they have food to eat, to ensure that they can survive. As long as they can survive, their cultivation will always improve, although it will take a long time. But it is better than dying, and the thing that the cultivators of the divine realm don't lack the most is time. However, what they didn't realize was that the longer they lived, the more times they went out to hunt, and the greater the possibility of encountering danger. Who could guarantee that they would come back safe and sound every time? Take Kong Ping and the other armored cultivators, for example. When they went out, there were nearly 30 of them, but when they returned, there were only 12 of them. Moreover, if it weren't for Shaolin Yu's help, it was very likely that they would have been completely wiped out. Of course, if Kong Ping and the others were not greedy for the ginseng, they would not have encountered the silver-haired wolf demon and the silver-armored cultivators. With their tacit cooperation, they should not have suffered such great losses in the end. After eating and drinking, Shaolin Yu's complexion became much better, but Kong Ping suddenly asked, "Benefactor, where did you come from?" Shaolin Yu had been asking Kong Ping all this time, but he didn't reveal any information about himself. Hearing Kong Ping's question, Shaolin Yu said without thinking, "I ascended from the lower realm, but it's been a long time since I ascended. It's just that when I was pulled down by the multicolored light and thrown down, I wasn't near any village, so I didn't know that there was a village nearby. In addition, there were wolf demons and flying beasts everywhere, so I found a cave by myself and have been living and cultivating in that cave, occasionally coming out to hunt some wolf demons." Benefactor, you're really an extraordinary person. Living alone, you can actually persist to this stage. At this point, Kong Ping suddenly paused and then continued, "All right, may I ask, Benefactor, what stage are you in now?" Shaolin Yu thought for a while, then said perfunctorily, "I don't know what stage I'm in, but I should be at the peak of the middle stage of the great god stage." "No wonder you're so powerful." Shaolin Yu's answer was similar to Kong Ping's guess, so Kong Ping didn't find it strange. He then got up and said, "Then I won't disturb your rest. If you have any errands, you can go to the stone house on the left and call for me. Benefactor, please rest here and recuperate. It's best if you don't move around too much." Kong Ping then left, and Shaolin Yu lay down on the bed very obediently. He put his hands behind his head, quietly digesting the information that Kong Ping had just given him. Xiaoling Yu was actually not at the peak of the middle stage of the Great God stage. He had just ascended to the God realm after passing the chaotic divine tribulation, but he wasn't theoretically at the early stage of the Great God stage, but at the peak of the late stage of the chaotic divine transformation realm. His strength should be equivalent to the peak of the late stage of the Great God stage. If he wanted to make progress in his cultivation, he had to break through to the 7th revolution of the 9-revolution chaos formula. He already had the ability to break through to the 7th revolution, but every revolution of the 9-revolution chaos formula was not easy to break through. The higher the level, the harder it was to break through, and the lower the success rate of breaking through. So he needed to prepare a lot. When he was in the immortal, devil, and demon realms, Xiaoling Yu could find very little divine-grade materials. Although he had obtained some materials to break through to the 7th revolution in the Tenchi's treasure trove, it was only some and not everything. There were still many materials that he needed to find in the God realm. The materials that Xiaoling Yu still lacked were not high-level divine-grade materials, but they were very special and not easy to find. And now that the God realm was in such a state, it undoubtedly increased the difficulty of finding materials. In order to ensure the long-term development of the Huamin in the immortal realm, when Xiaoling Yu ascended, he only brought a few divine-grade materials that were useful for him to break through to the immortal realm. As for the other divine weapons, divine pills, and divine-grade materials, he almost did not touch a single one. And now he did not have many divine stones on him. So, when he ascended to the immortal realm, it was just like when he first ascended to the devil realm. He needed to become rich first. It was only after ascending that he realized that he needed to ensure that he would not starve to death. In fact, for Xiaoling Yu, who had 3 divine weapons, it was easy to go out and hunt the demon wolves. It must be known that when he first ascended, he had already killed countless demon wolves. But at that time, he did not know that these demon wolves could be used to fill his stomach, so he did not clean up the battlefield. Ordinary demon wolves were easy to deal with, but there were also powerful demon wolves like the silver-furred demon wolves. Moreover, there were many ferocious flying beasts in the sky, so leaving the village on a long journey was also a certain risk. Xiaoling Yu could not possibly run around with a divine weapon every day. The most important thing was that to go on a long journey, one must first have a goal and a route. Walking blindly in the God realm would definitely be very easy to lose one's life. Kong Ping had just said that the flying beasts and demon wolves were only the dangers near the Linggu Valley. There were other more powerful flying beasts and beasts further away from the Linggu Valley. Kong Ping had also just said that if one wanted to go on a long journey, one must first obtain the village chief's permission. Moreover, before going on a long journey, the village chief would provide a relatively safe route. As for why the village chief would provide a relatively safe route, Kong Ping did not know. He thought that it was probably the result of many years of experience in the village. As for why the village chief continued to stay in the village when he clearly had a route to leave, Kong Ping was even more unclear. He only thought that the village chief felt that his strength was not enough and did not dare to go out and take risks. After all, the village chief was only at the late stage of the Great God realm. And if a cultivator at the late stage of the Great God realm were to encounter the silver-furred wolf king alone, there was almost no chance of survival. Cultivators who had just ascended, or cultivators at the lowest level of the God realm, as long as they did not have an extremely powerful backer, would have to gather together and form a combined force to survive. For example, when going out to hunt, one would have to rely on the cooperation of a team. Going out to hunt alone was no different from suicide. And a team with good teamwork would often be able to unleash a battle prowess that was beyond one's imagination. For example, Kong Ping's team of close to 30 armored cultivators was able to kill a silver-furred wolf king by relying on the advantage of teamwork and numbers, although they paid a heavy price. It was also because everyone was proficient in teamwork that although there were many silver-furred wolf king outside and many flying beasts in the sky, a team like the Linggu Valley, which did not even have a single cultivator at the Heavenly God realm, was able to survive in this vast mountain forest for so long. Although Xiao Yu was not hungry, when Kong Ping brought over wine and meat, he still ate and drank in big mouthfuls. At the same time, he continued to chat with Kong Ping, and just as the two of them were eating and chatting, a few cultivators walked in together. Shi Wei, who had blocked Xiao Yu in front of the valley's large iron gate, was among them. No wonder we couldn't find you. So you were hiding here. A cultivator who looked to be in his 50s from the secular world said to Kong Ping in a strange tone, I came here and you call that hiding? Besides, why should I hide? Kong Ping did not get up. He only glanced at the people beside him and replied indifferently. Kong Ping, stop playing dumb. Don't tell me you don't know why you're hiding. The skinny old man continued to speak. Then tell me, why should I hide? Kong Ping said calmly. You obtained great benefits outside and are unwilling to hand them over. So you're hiding? The thin old man replied. You're talking about the silver-furred wolf king and the ginseng, right? Kong Ping asked in return. It's good that you know, the thin old man replied. Since you're talking about those two, then please explain why I have to hand them over, Vice Village Head. According to the rules of the village, every time we return from hunting, we only need to hand over enough meat. As for the other things that we obtained from killing and chance encounters outside, we don't need to hand them over. Kong Ping sneered. But you didn't hand over enough meat, the thin old man said with an indifferent expression. That's because many of our brothers died. Moreover, those of us who return alive were all heavily injured, Kong Ping said righteously. That's your own problem. You didn't hand over enough meat, so you naturally have to hand over other things to make up for it, the thin old man said with full confidence. If the village only wants these two things to make up for the mission, then forgive me for not being able to comply, Kong Ping said with a shake of his head. Of course, it's not just making up for the mission. The village will also reward you with meat for 100 years. That way, you won't have to go out hunting for the next 100 years, the thin old man said. Chapter 501. There's no point in talking anymore. Kong Ping, are you going to hand it over or not? The thin deputy village chief asked impatiently. I'm not handing it over. Before you came, did you get the village chief's permission? Kong Ping said, not backing down at all. It was the village chief who told us to come find you. The deputy village chief first responded, then gave a look to the people behind him and said, tie him up. Shi Wei and the others seemed to have been waiting for a long time. They immediately swarmed forward, wanting to capture Kong Ping without any explanation. Kong Ping's reaction speed was not slow. Before he got up, he quickly kicked one of the people pouncing at him. This kick landed on that person's calf. That person could not bear such a blow and directly knelt in front of Kong Ping with a thump. The people coming from both sides were prepared to grab Kong Ping's arms. They stretched out 4 hands towards Kong Ping, but Kong Ping still did not stand up. He only stretched out his hands to both sides, and in an instant, each of them grabbed onto his wrists. Kong Ping's 2 hands slightly exerted force, and 2 crisp sounds were heard, followed by the 2 people's miserable screams. Kong Ping, who went out hunting all year round and experienced many bloody battles, had a fighting sense and reaction speed that ordinary cultivators could not reach. Kong Ping's group of armor cultivators had lost so many people this time, but he was able to survive not because of luck. Kong Ping, you're openly going against the entire village. I think you're tired of living. The deputy village chief said angrily. It's you who didn't leave me a way out. This time, so many of our brothers died in battle. I have to take care of their wives and children. They use their lives to exchange for the harvest, but you want to take it away for free. How can I explain it to our dead brothers? Kong Ping sneered. Humph. Do you think you can go against the entire village with your strength alone? You're really reckless. The deputy village chief coldly snorted. With a wave of his hand, a long black rope shot out like a slender viper and tied Kong Ping up in a flash. At the same time, the deputy village chief quickly took a step forward and quickly formed a restriction seal, placing it on Kong Ping's body. Kong Ping's body was bound by the long rope, and his cultivation was sealed by the restriction seal. He had no power to resist at all. This was the Linggu Valley's matter, so Xiao Lingyu should not interfere. As an outsider, he had no right to interfere. However, he had a good chat with Kong Ping earlier, and he could see that Kong Ping was a person who valued friendship and righteousness. As a result, he could not help but stand and say, "As an outsider, I have something to say, and that's that your actions are truly too much." Benefactor, you don't have to cause trouble for me. The village has its rules. Everyone in the village is watching. They can't do anything to me. Kong Ping was still full of energy. Previously, Xiao Lingyu had told Kong Ping that his cultivation was at the peak of the middle stage of the Great God Realm. Although this cultivation was considered powerful, he was only one person. Kong Ping did not want his benefactor, who had just recovered from his injuries, to be involved in the village's disputes. When Xiao Lingyu heard Kong Ping's words and saw that Kong Ping's face did not have the slightest trace of fear, he shrugged indifferently and did not intend to continue speaking. "Take him away and lock him up in the dungeon first," the deputy village chief said to the people beside him. Kong Ping was brought out of the stone house by Shi Wei and the others. However, as soon as he reached the door, he began to shout loudly, attracting the nearby villagers to come and take a look. The deputy village chief's expression did not look good. He did not immediately leave the stone house. Instead, he said to Xiao Lingyu, "Now that you've recovered, you should return in 2 days to avoid any misunderstandings." Xiao Lingyu still shrugged indifferently. He did not say that he would leave immediately. The deputy village chief stood there and thought for a while. It seemed that there was nothing more to say, so he nodded and left the stone house. Xiao Lingyu had already gathered the information that he wanted to gather. He could have left immediately, but he wanted to see how the Linggu Valley would deal with Kong Ping. He also wanted to obtain a safe route from the old village chief, so he decided to stay for a few more days. In order to show that he did not have any ill intentions, Xiao Lingyu remained in the stone house. He did not go out too much and did not ask anyone else for information. However, his injuries did seem to have healed. The village chief did not intend to keep him and would even ask him to leave in 2 or 3 days. This was a problem that he needed to solve. Xiao Lingyu walked around the house a few times, but he could not think of a suitable solution. In the end, he walked out gloomily. As soon as he walked out of the house, Xiao Lingyu saw medicine master Yueru picking herbs in the herb garden. Beside Yueru, there was a young cultivator following Yueru like a helper. Moreover, the young cultivator looked very attentive. Xiao Lingyu was someone who had seen and experienced a lot. He could tell at a glance that the young cultivator was interested in medicine master Yueru. On the other hand, medicine master Yueru did not like the young cultivator. Although the man and woman were standing together, they looked like they were in harmony. Yueru could not be bothered to look at the young cultivator. However, the young cultivator was rather thick-skinned. He intentionally or unintentionally rubbed his face against Yueru. He even held a handkerchief. There was clearly no sweat on Yueru's forehead, but he still smiled obsequiously and helped her wipe her sweat. Xiao Lingyu could not understand why a woman like Yueru would be so patient with the young cultivator. If it was a slightly more arrogant woman, she would have already told him to scram. Of course, this had nothing to do with Xiao Lingyu. He was just staring curiously because he had nothing to do. The young cultivator quickly saw Xiao Lingyu. He frowned slightly, and his obsequious smile immediately disappeared. He also put away his handkerchief and glared at Xiao Lingyu. From the young cultivator's expression, he seemed to be very unhappy that Xiao Lingyu was watching him chase a woman. His glare was a warning to Xiao Lingyu to leave. At this moment, Xiao Lingyu suddenly thought of a plan. Not only did he not leave, he even revealed a disdainful smile. The young cultivator was furious. He took 3 steps forward and arrived in front of Xiao Lingyu like a gust of wind. Looking at his speed, his cultivation should have just reached the early stage of the Great God Realm. "What are you looking at? Don't you have to do anything?" The young cultivator pointed at Xiao Lingyu and scolded angrily. "I'm just looking. Don't get agitated." Xiao Lingyu smiled and replied. Then, he said, "You don't have to do anything. Why should I? How dare you compare yourself to me? My father is the deputy village chief." The young cultivator replied arrogantly. In that case, this young cultivator was born and raised in the realm of the gods. He did not ascend from the lower realm. In fact, most of the cultivators in the realm of the gods grew up in the realm of the gods. These cultivators did not understand the difficulties of cultivation as well as those who ascended from the lower realm. Therefore, their temperament and state of mind could not be compared to those who ascended from the lower realm. "Oh, the deputy village chief's son doesn't have to do anything?" Xiaoling Yu asked in surprise. He did not expect that a small village in the realm of the gods would have such bureaucracy. "As long as there is enough meat, I don't have to do anything. What about you? Do you?" The young cultivator replied to Xiaoling Yu matter-of-factly. "If that's the case, then whether I do anything or not has nothing to do with you, right? If I don't do anything, I'll starve. I deserve it. Just like I'm standing here. I can look at whatever I want. If you don't want me to look at you, you can stand further away. That way, I won't be able to see you," Xiaoling Yu replied nimbly. "Ha!" Medicine Master Yuru, who was in the herb garden, could not help but laugh. She felt that Xiaoling Yu's answer was very interesting. Yueru knew that Xiaoling Yu was not from the Lingu Valley. She also knew that the deputy village chief's son might not know about Xiaoling Yu's situation. However, she had no intention of explaining the situation. "In this village, I don't even have to hide when I see the village chief. It has always been others who hide from me. If you know what's good for you, then scram. Otherwise," the young cultivator said threateningly. He had originally wanted to show off his strength in front of Yueru's medicine master. He did not expect to run into a wall like never before. This made him very angry. At this moment, Xiaoling Yu finally understood why Yueru's medicine master was so patient with this fellow. It turned out that this fellow had some background. However, he did not understand how the deputy village chief's son could be so arrogant. "Don't scare me. I didn't grow up being scared," Xiaoling Yu replied in a similarly arrogant tone. The disdain on his face was very obvious. "You dare to call yourself father in front of me?" The young cultivator was completely enraged. He raised his fist and punched Xiaoling Yu's chest. Although the two of them were very close, and the young cultivator's speed was very fast, Xiaoling Yu could still easily dodge. However, he did not dodge. Instead, he let the other party's fist land squarely on his chest. Then, he let out a scream, and his body flew backward. As he flew backward, Xiaoling Yu vomited a long stream of blood. After flying backward for a full 15 meters, Xiaoling Yu's body landed on the ground. Then, he struggled to get up. However, he vomited a few more mouthfuls of blood and was unable to get up. Xiaoling Yu was faking it. He wanted to let himself be injured again so that he could continue to recuperate in the Lingu Valley. The young cultivator did not know that Xiaoling Yu was faking it. He first looked at his fist in astonishment, as if he did not expect his fist to be so powerful. However, at this moment, Yueru was watching from the side. Then, he touched his slightly painful fist and said with the attitude of an expert who had just won a battle, "How dare you say such arrogant words with just this little bit of skill? You really deserve to be taught a lesson. How can you randomly hit people?" Xiaoling Yu, on the other hand, pretended to be angry as he questioned. Chapter 502. Xiaoling Yu's expression was one of pain, but his heart was bursting with joy. He thought to himself that this kid was really cooperative. However, under the cover of the blue light, he felt as if his entire body was bathed in holy light. Every inch of his muscles and bones felt incomparably comfortable. The effect of the blue light on his body was too obvious and too effective. If he did it a few more times, Xiaoling Yu felt that he would very likely become addicted. While he was enjoying it, Xiaoling Yu still had to pretend that he was in pain. His expression was a little twisted. Yueru saw this and felt a little amused. She knew very well that no matter how serious the injury was, as long as he was enveloped by her blue light, he would no longer feel pain. In fact, he would even reveal an expression of enjoyment. However, Xiaoling Yu's current expression was clearly abnormal. Continue pretending. You've been pretending from the beginning, and now you want to continue pretending. I really don't know what your motive is. Although Yueru saw through it, she naturally wouldn't say it out loud. At least, she wouldn't say it out loud in front of the deputy village chief's son. After thinking about it for a while, she turned to the deputy village chief's son and said, "He's our benefactor who just saved the lives of more than 10 villagers who were out hunting. How can you punch him just because you don't like him? He didn't say anything. How would I know that he saved the villagers? I thought he was one of those lazy people in the village," the young cultivator said nonchalantly. When our benefactor entered the village, he was already seriously injured and unconscious. Now that he woke up, he took a punch from you. Not only did he have new internal injuries, his old injuries will probably flare up again. You've caused a lot of trouble. If the village chief or your father finds out about this, you'll definitely be punished, Medicine Master Yueru said in a serious tone. Who knows? I'm not afraid. The young cultivator still didn't look the slightest bit afraid, but his eyes still flickered. This proved that he was still a little guilty. You should go back. I can help you cover up this matter, Yueru reminded him kindly. Really? The young cultivator's eyes lit up. He seemed to be grateful. Really? Yueru nodded. Haha, that's great. I knew you liked me. The young cultivator was overjoyed and left with a laugh. Yueru calmly watched as the young cultivator walked further and further away. When the young cultivator's back had completely disappeared from her sight, she suddenly turned around and said to Xiaoling Yu, who was sitting on the ground and seemed to be circulating her energy to heal her injuries, "You should go back to your room and meditate to heal your injuries." Xiaoling Yu opened her eyes and asked, "Is this how Yulingu Valley people treat others? Even if I'm not your benefactor, I'm still a guest." After speaking, he even coughed twice symbolically, as if he was seriously injured. He was born reckless and arrogant. Don't lower yourself to his level. Yueru first comforted him, then suddenly said, "Do you want to stay in our village for a few more days?" Xiaoling Yu only stood up silently and did not answer directly. "If you want to stay for a few more days, don't tell anyone that he hit you just now. Of course, I will help you prove to everyone that your injuries have not fully healed," Yueru suggested. "Medicine Master Yu really takes good care of that kid," Xiaoling Yu replied non-committally, then strode into the stone house. Yueru knew that Xiaoling Yu's reply meant that he had agreed to her suggestion. Thus, she did not follow him into the house to ask for more details. Instead, she went to the herb garden as if she wanted to finish her unfinished work. The next day, the old village chief and the deputy village chief came together. On the surface, they said that they were here to visit and express their gratitude, but in reality, they were preparing to ask Xiaoling Yu to leave. However, just as the two village chiefs entered the house, Medicine Master Yu followed them into the house. Xiaoling Yu was already prepared. At this moment, his face was pale and bloodless, as if he had been seriously injured. When I diagnosed him a few days ago, I did not see that he had a hidden illness. That hidden illness suddenly flared up yesterday, causing his injuries not only to not fully recover, but also to worsen. This is Yueru's fault, Yueru explained to the two village chiefs, who were slightly surprised. Haha, Miss Yueru, there is no need to blame yourself. No one can be completely flawless. As long as our benefactor is fine, everything is fine. The old village chief smiled benevolently. Approximately how long will it take for our benefactor to fully recover? The deputy village chief asked with a straight face, as if he was not satisfied with the situation. At most half a year, at least a month, Yueru replied. The deputy village chief frowned again, while the old village chief said, "Then let our benefactor have a good rest. We will not disturb him anymore. Let's all go back." As the old village chief spoke, he was already walking towards the door. The deputy village chief solemnly instructed Yueru, "Our benefactor's injuries are more important. Medicine Master Yueru, you must do your best to help our benefactor recover as soon as possible so that he can return home as soon as possible. As for the other matters in the village, put them aside for now." Yueru understands. Medicine Master Yueru nodded in response. After the two village chiefs left, Xiaoling Yu put his hands behind his head and asked Yueru, "Do you know how the village plans to deal with Kongping?" Yueru quietly sat down and asked curiously, "You're concerned about this?" Xiaoling Yu said matter-of-factly, "I was the one who saved his life. Of course I'm concerned about his current safety." Yueru nodded again, acknowledging Xiaoling Yu's answer. However, he then shook his head and said, "I don't know how the village plans to deal with him. I only know that he will definitely suffer." "Why?" "I see that the old village chief is kind and doesn't seem like an unreasonable person. He shouldn't be so calculative with the villagers over some meat missions, right?" Xiaoling Yu asked in confusion. The old village chief won't be calculative, but the deputy village chief might not be so easy to talk to. In our village, the deputy village chief is the one who truly holds power," Yueru replied with a smile. However, at this point, he seemed to realize that he had said too much, so he stopped there. "The deputy village chief has more authority than the village chief?" Xiaoling Yu asked directly. Yueru hesitated for a moment, but still explained in the end, "It's not about who has more authority. It's just that the deputy village chief has a lot of relatives in this village. The villagers who have close relationships with the deputy village chief account for 1/5 of the entire village." Hearing Yueru's words, Xiaoling Yu understood. 1/5 of the villagers in a village didn't sound like much, but in reality, if they banded together, they were indeed a force to be reckoned with. At the very least, they held a lot of weight in this village. After all, this 1/5 of the cultivators also had close friends. No wonder the deputy village chief's son is so arrogant. It turns out that he has the support of his clan. However, acting like a tyrant in a small village like this isn't much of a skill, Xiaoling Yu said in a strange tone. As he spoke, his face was clearly filled with disdain and contempt. Although this is a small village, and in the boundless realm of the gods, it's completely unremarkable. However, the people living in this small village are all insignificant people, and the village chief and deputy village chief are the big shots among us insignificant people," Yueru said with a smile. "Kongping's life shouldn't be in danger, right?" Xiaoling Yu changed the topic again. "No, he didn't commit any serious crimes. Why would he be executed?" Yueru replied with certainty. At this moment, Yueru was a little puzzled. This person was clearly not from the Lingu Valley, and he shouldn't have known Kongping and the others before this. Now that he was a guest in the Lingu Valley and could be asked to leave at any time, how could he still be so calm and still be concerned about Kongping's safety? If there was nothing wrong with this person, then he must be a cultivator who valued loyalty, dared to take responsibility, and had courage. Of course, this was only Yueru's feeling. "I heard that the village chief has a safe route map for a long journey. Is this true?" Xiaoling Yu also felt that Yueru's temperament was not bad, so his words were more straightforward and didn't beat around the bush deliberately. "There's no such thing as a safe route map. The village chief does have a relatively safe route map that leads to the nearest city. Basically, every village chief has a route map that leads to the city. However, the villages are very far away from the city. There are thousands of mountains and rivers in between, so how can it be safe?" Yueru shook her head and smiled bitterly. "It's fine as long as it's relatively safe. At least the route points in the right direction. Also, the experience accumulated by the predecessors is definitely useful." Xiaoling Yu stroked his chin and said, "Why, you want to get that route map from the village chief?" Yueru asked. "Yes." Xiaoling Yu nodded. "Huh. The village chief won't give that route map to you so easily." Yueru shook his head and smiled. "Why is that?" Xiaoling Yu asked. "Because you're not a villager of the village. Moreover, even if you're a villager of the village chief will only give you that route map and allow you to travel alone after you've reached the heavenly god stage," Yueru explained. "Then what do I need to do to become a villager of the village?" Xiaoling Yu thought for a moment and asked. Yueru looked at Xiaoling Yu with a bit of surprise and asked, "You want to join our village?" "Why can't I?" Xiaoling Yu nodded first and then asked. "It's not that you can't. However, if you want to become a villager of our village, you have to fulfill one condition, and that is that you're not a villager of another village. Moreover, you have to swear that you won't leave until you reach the heavenly god stage. You also have to abide by the village's rules. Yueru explained, and then said, generally speaking, our village only accepts cultivators who have just ascended. Shaoling Yu said, I've never joined another village, and I'm someone who abides by the rules. Huh? Yueru only smiled. Shaoling Yu could tell from Yueru's smile that this girl most likely didn't believe him. In the past few days, Yueru had followed the deputy village chief's instructions and looked after Shaoling Yu almost every day. However, she didn't really put in any effort to treat Shaoling Yu's injuries. She knew that Shaoling Yu didn't need treatment. However, a few days had passed, and before Shaoling Yu could join the Lingu Valley, a bell that shook the entire valley sounded. Chapter 503. This is the sound of the drum to summon all the villagers to the square. As Yueru spoke, he stood up and walked out of the house. Shaoling Yu pondered for a moment. Naturally, he was extremely curious, so he followed them. In the middle of the valley, which was also the center of Lin Valley Village, there was a rather large plaza. The entire plaza was paved with bluestone slabs. From the various mottled and ancient marks on the bluestone slabs, one could tell that the plaza had been around for quite some time. The square did not have a regular shape. Instead, there was a high platform in the middle that looked like an altar. At this moment, many Lingu Valley villagers had already gathered around the high platform. They were pointing at it and discussing animatedly. Shaoling Yu followed Yueru to the edge of the square. She did not squeeze into the crowd. Instead, she stood in a corner of the square with the mentality of watching a show. Yueru did not stand with Shaoling Yu. Instead, he stood closer to the high platform than Shaoling Yu. He was just outside the crowd of onlookers. After waiting quietly for a while, the old village chief went up to the high platform and waved his hand to signal for everyone to quiet down. Then he said loudly, Today, I have called everyone here for one thing. That is to punish a villager who has disregarded the village rules. His name is Kong Ping. Kong Ping? How can it be him? Hasn't Kong Ping always been very law-abiding? You guys still don't know. Kong Ping fought with the deputy village chief last time and even injured someone. Kong Ping is finished this time. He dared to challenge the deputy village chief. No one could save him. That group of people have always had a bad relationship with the deputy village chief. It's just that the deputy village chief did not find a suitable opportunity to punish them in the past. I wonder how they will be punished. It shouldn't be too serious. After all, they didn't commit any major crimes. At most, they will just admit their mistakes and be casually whipped a few times. As soon as the village chief finished speaking, the Lingu Valley villagers began to discuss in low voices in the square. Although Shaoling Yu was standing far away, she could still hear them clearly. Bring Kong Ping here. The old village chief shouted to the side. A group of armored cultivators walked out from a corner of the square, and Kong Ping was in the middle of them. However, while the armored cultivators were dressed in neat and tidy attire, Kong Ping's clothes were tattered and his hair was disheveled. He gave off a dispirited and powerless feeling. From the looks of it, Kong Ping must have suffered quite a bit after being imprisoned. Shaoling Yu also felt that Kong Ping's crime was not a serious one. At most, the deputy village chief would punish him in public, but he would not be sentenced to death. Therefore, he crossed his arms in front of his chest and looked calm. It wasn't a bad idea to let Kong Ping suffer some physical pain. At least it would make him understand that there were times when he had to lower his head. Even if he didn't lower his head, he had to learn to use other methods to deal with his enemies instead of fighting them head-on. Kong Ping was escorted to the stage by a group of armored cultivators. Then, he was tied to a pillar that suddenly appeared. Even now, Kong Ping still had an unyielding expression on his face. He held his head high, like a hero in distress who was ready to die. He really did have an unyielding spirit. However, Kong Ping clearly had an agitated and indignant expression on his face. He seemed to have something to say to everyone, but his lips were trembling and he couldn't make a sound. Xiao Lingyu reckoned that Kong Ping's mouth and tongue had been sealed, and his cultivation base had been sealed as well. That was why he couldn't speak. In front of all the villagers, the deputy village chief definitely wouldn't give Kong Ping a chance to spout nonsense, nor would he give him a chance to refute. Kong Ping's crime is to defy the village rules. He refused to hand over the meat he obtained outside and injured the villagers. According to the village rules, we've decided to give him 2 ways to deal with this. The first is to make him admit his mistake in public and promise that he won't commit the same mistake in the future. Then he'll be whipped. The second is to burn him in a raging fire and turn him into ashes. As for how to deal with him, we'll follow the village rules and let the villagers vote to decide. In other words, we'll deal with him according to the village rules. The village chief said with a dignified expression. Actually, refusing to hand over the meat wasn't a big deal. The key point was that Kong Ping had attacked the villagers and was labeled as defying the village rules. This crime was obviously magnified. Those who choose to be whipped, please stand to the left. Those who choose to be burned, please stand to the right. The village chief said without changing his expression. Next, the villagers of the entire Linggu Valley went through another round of heated discussion and then began to choose a side. Looking at the situation of the sides, Xiao Lingyu's frown deepened. First, there was a group of people who didn't hesitate to go to the right, which actually led many people to go to the higher right. The people on the right chose to be burned, which was to execute Kong Ping. How could these villagers be so cruel? Kong Ping's mistake definitely wouldn't lead to death. Most importantly, what did Kong Ping do wrong? Through his conversation with Yuru, Xiao Lingyu could guess that the deputy village chief had already informed his relatives of how to choose. The deputy village chief's faction had many people and was extremely powerful in the Linggu Valley. Everyone didn't want to offend them, so naturally, they would stand on their side. In this way, this so-called vote seemed fair, but in reality, it could be easily controlled by the deputy village chief. It was absolutely easy for him to treat people's lives like grass. Xiao Lingyu saw Yueru. Although Yuru stood to the left with a helpless expression, it was to no avail. After 100 breaths of time, the villagers had finished choosing their sides. Only a pitiful 100 people stood to the left, while the villagers on the right side of the high platform were a large black mass. With a casual glance, one could tell that there were thousands of people on the right side. The result was obvious. Xiao Lingyu saw a hint of a smug smile faintly appear on the deputy village chief's face. Since everyone's opinions are so unanimous, in order to warn future generations not to make the same mistake, I hope that everyone will take this as a warning and let our Linggu Valley neighbors be harmonious and the entire village be united. The village chief's expression was still very calm. After he spoke with a strong sense of righteousness, he said to the people beside him, "Let's go down. The burning at the stake will be carried out immediately." Wait. Xiao Lingyu really couldn't stand it anymore. He shouted as the people on the platform prepared to go down. Then, he quickly walked down the platform in 2 steps and then jumped up onto the platform. "Sir, aren't you still seriously injured? Your movements are very smooth," the deputy village chief said with narrowed eyes. Everyone in the village was here, so the deputy village chief naturally had no reason to be too polite to Xiao Lingyu. "I think that Kong Ping didn't do anything wrong at all. He doesn't deserve to die," Xiao Lingyu said rather calmly. At this moment, Kong Ping, who was tied to the pillar, repeatedly signaled with his eyes for Xiao Lingyu to go down the platform. He didn't want to implicate Xiao Lingyu because of his matter. Of course, his face was naturally filled with gratitude. Xiao Lingyu saw Kong Ping's signal, but he wouldn't go down the platform because no one could do anything to him. What did he have to fear? Originally, Xiao Lingyu didn't want to cause trouble and didn't want to be so high profile. However, he really couldn't stand the way the Linggu Valley dealt with Kong Ping's matter. In a situation where it was absolutely safe, he didn't mind forcefully taking the lead. Whether he did anything wrong or not is not up to you to decide, the deputy village chief said unhappily. "Then who is the one who has the final say? You?" Xiao Lingyu said bluntly. "Of course, it's not up to me. It's up to the entire village. If he didn't do anything wrong, why did the majority of the villagers choose to execute him? The deputy village chief said, as if he was reasonable. Then why don't you let the person involved speak a few words? Moreover, before you convicted him, did you publicly interrogate him? Xiaoling Yu asked again. We have already interrogated him regarding his wrongdoings. His crime was also determined according to the village rules. As for why we sealed his mouth, it was because we didn't want him to roar and go crazy here, the deputy village chief said with conviction. It's just a one-sided story. Did any of the villagers listen to your so-called interrogation? Did he plead guilty when you convicted him? Xiaoling Yu asked relentlessly. The deputy village chief's face gradually darkened. He was finding it harder and harder to deal with Xiaoling Yu's questions. At this moment, all the villagers were staring at the platform, as if waiting for the deputy village chief to give an answer. To Xiaoling Yu's surprise, the village chief was silent at this moment. He didn't show the slightest repulsion toward him coming on stage to disrupt the situation. This village has its own rules. It's not up to you to judge. You are only temporarily recuperating in this village. You have no right to interfere with the village's affairs. You should step down. If you continue to pester us endlessly, I can only order someone to ask you to step down. The deputy village chief didn't answer the question, but said very firmly, Lord Deputy Village Chief, please clearly explain Kong Ping's matter in front of the entire village. If you don't give a convincing explanation, I won't agree. I believe that the entire village won't agree either. At this point, Xiaoling Yu looked at the villagers below the platform and said, I'm not meddling in other people's business. I just don't want to see unfair and undisclosed matters, and I don't want anyone to die in vain. I think everyone should feel the same way. Of course, I'm not a coward. Many of the villagers standing on the right side of the platform lowered their heads after hearing Xiaoling Yu's words. If we confusedly deal with Kong Ping today, who knows how many more people will be inexplicably tied up here and burned in the fire in the future. Since there are village rules to follow, then let's do it according to the village rules. Don't tell me that Lingu Valley's village rules say that people who make mistakes can't argue in public. Xiaoling Yu said righteously. Unreasonable troublemaker. Men, chase this person out of the village. The deputy village chief's patience was completely exhausted. He shouted at the group of armored cultivators who were escorting Kong Ping onto the platform. The armored cultivators were naturally very obedient. They immediately swarmed forward, preparing to attack Xiaoling Yu. However, they were also in the great divinity stage. Although they were wearing armor and looked very powerful, their strength was still much weaker than Xiaoling Yu's. They had just rushed to Xiaoling Yu's side when Xiaoling Yu quickly attacked and knocked 3 of them off the platform. Naturally, Xiaoling Yu had a sense of propriety when he attacked. He only knocked the armored cultivators off the stage and did not injure him at all. In less than 2 breaths of time after the armored cultivators rushed to Xiaoling Yu's side, none of them were standing on the platform. Chapter 504. There were quite a few Lingu Valley villagers who responded to the deputy village chief's call. They swarmed forward, and most of them belonged to the deputy village chief's faction. At a time like this, they had to step forward bravely. Enough! The village chief's voice rang out. Although it gave people a feeling of age, it was full of dignity. The villagers who had already rushed to the bottom of the stage immediately stopped. They didn't dare to climb up the stage, and only stared at the old village chief. From beginning to end, Xiaoling Yu's expression was very calm. Even if the nearly 1,000 villagers rushed up to capture him, he didn't show the slightest bit of fear. Release Kong Ping's restriction and let him explain everything from beginning to end, the old village chief said to the deputy village chief. He's already said everything that needs to be said. I don't think there's a need to do anything more. The deputy village chief was unwilling to do as he was told. What harm is there in letting him say it one more time? The old village chief narrowed his eyes at the deputy village chief, but there was a sense of dignity without being angry. After being stared at by the old village chief like this for a while, the deputy village chief still walked in front of Kong Ping and released the restriction on him. Benefactor, this matter has nothing to do with you. You don't have to take the risk for me. After Kong Ping regained his freedom of speech, the first thing he said was to Shaoling Yu. His tone was clearly filled with gratitude. Your life was saved by me. If you die like this, then wouldn't I have saved you for nothing? You'd better explain the matter clearly, Shaoling Yu said calmly. Kong Ping nodded, then sneered at the villagers below the stage and said, Do you all want me to die so badly? What good would it do you all if I died? Today, the deputy village chief used this matter to tie me up here and even wanted to burn me alive. Then in the future, he can easily tie one of you up here. The deputy village chief's family is very powerful, but if everyone continues to be like this, you'd better tell us what you did wrong. Say less useless things. The old village chief interrupted Kong Ping's words and reminded him. There were some things that everyone was well aware of, but once they were out in the open, their influence would increase many times over. However, even though Kong Ping only said half of what he wanted to say, the villagers were all god-tier cultivators after all. Naturally, they could guess the rest of what he wanted to say. Their gazes involuntarily turned to the vice-village chief and the people close to him. For many years, the deputy village chief's faction of villagers had been as arrogant as royalty in the Lingu Valley. Not only were they supercilious and domineering, they even occasionally bullied other villagers. The villagers hated the vice-village chief's faction very much, but they were also afraid of their great power, so they dared to be angry but did not dare to say anything. The deputy village chief's expression was extremely gloomy. If his gaze could kill, Shaoling Yu, who was still standing on the stage unscathed, would have died countless times. At that moment, Kong Ping, who had been reminded by the old village chief, began to narrate the entire story. What Kong Ping said was completely the truth, but this truth was not what the villagers knew, nor was it one of the stories that had been circulating in the village. In truth, the entire story was that Kong Ping and the others had not collected enough meat when they went out to hunt last time. When they returned, they naturally did not have enough meat to pay the village's stipulated amount. Moreover, Kong Ping had indeed injured the villagers who had come to settle the score with the deputy village chief. The reason Kong Ping had attacked was because he could not accept the deputy village chief's attitude at that time. Is what he said true? After Kong Ping finished speaking, the old village chief asked the deputy village chief. At that moment, there was no sound below the stage. They were all waiting for the deputy village chief to reply, but the deputy village chief only stood on the stage with a gloomy expression. Previously, I ordered you to ask Kong Ping's group about their harvest and accept what should be handed over to the village. I did not say that they had to hand over the full amount, nor did I say that they had to hand over the Silver Wolf King and the Awakened Ginseng. I only said that if they were willing to exchange them for meat, the village would give them a satisfactory price. The old village chief said to the deputy village chief with a bit of reproach, I don't know if you didn't understand clearly or if you purposely changed my meaning. Village chief, don't listen to Kong Ping's words. I can swear on my soul that if half of what I said is false, then let my soul scatter. Without waiting for the deputy village chief to finish speaking, Kong Ping had already taken the initiative to speak and continued to ask, I dare to swear, deputy village chief, do you dare? The deputy village chief naturally didn't dare to do so. Instead, he changed the topic and said, but it's a fact that he injured the villagers. Even if we did something wrong, he shouldn't have attacked us. Attacking the people in his own village is also a big crime. But the reason he attacked was because you guys forced him too much. You guys created trouble for no reason and even wanted to tie him up. Naturally, he would resist. Moreover, he only resisted and did not attack viciously. Shaoling Yu interrupted. Your Excellency seems to be interfering a bit too much. The deputy village chief coldly snorted. The deputy village chief did not continue to argue. The facts were obvious, and the villagers were not fools. Naturally, they already knew the truth. In fact, the truth had already spread in the village before. It was just that no one dared to believe it, because everyone was afraid of offending the deputy village chief. This time, If not for Xiao Yu standing up, Kong Ping would only have the fate of being burned alive. Even until his death, he would not be able to personally announce the truth to the public. There are still some suspicious points in this matter. Let Kong Ping go first and slowly investigate in the future. Everyone disperse. At this time, the village chief gave a conclusion. Although the deputy village chief was unwilling, he could only do as he was told. He waved his hand and took back the rope. Kong Ping completely regained his freedom. However, he first went to Xiao Yu's side and bowed, saying, "Benefactor has saved Kong Ping's life again." At this time, Yuru also came up on stage. After Xiao Yu helped Kong Ping up, he said to the old village chief, "A good person was almost killed. Could it be that this matter is over just like this? Are you not going to give everyone an explanation in front of the entire village?" The old village chief did not answer. He only waved his hand with his back facing Xiao Yu. However, Yuru said, "This matter will end here. The deputy village chief is powerful. Even if we continue to investigate, it will be meaningless. Didn't you see how many people stood on the left side just now?" Xiao Yu was not afraid of the deputy village chief's power. However, he also did not want to cause too much trouble for himself. Now that Kong Ping had been saved and the deputy village chief had lost face in front of the entire village, he should also stop. However, today, Xiao Yu had witnessed the deputy village chief's power in the Lingu Valley. It seemed that even the old village chief could not do anything about it. The deputy village chief had wronged Kong Ping and almost killed him. The matter was so obvious, but the old village chief did not intend to pursue the matter. Actually, it is precisely because no one pursued the matter and no one resisted that everyone became more and more afraid of the deputy village chief's power. If everyone could band together and pay more attention to their own rights, they would not be so arrogant. After all, they only make up 1/5 of the village's population and not 3/5, Xiao Yu commented calmly. It's easier said than done. After all, they're a large clan. They can band together, but the rest of the village cannot. That is because we are not one family, but many families. Kong Ping shook his head and smiled bitterly. The villagers in the square had already dispersed as they discussed. Xiao Yu and Kong Ping also returned to the small stone house next to the medicinal garden. Xiao Yu's temporary resting place was next door to Kong Ping's. In fact, it was not far from Yueru's residence. The reason why Yueru lived nearby was because there were several medicinal gardens in the Lingu Valley nearby. As the only pharmacist in the village, she naturally had to live here and be responsible for the cultivation and collection of those medicinal herbs. For a long time, in order to allow the injured to recover faster and also to make it easier for Yueru to save them, the injured in the Lingu Valley would usually be arranged to rest in the nearby houses. Kong Ping also lived nearby because he had been seriously injured in the dense forest. Now, he was the one who had not recovered from his old injuries and had to continue living next door to Xiao Yu. After this incident, I reckon that you will not be able to join the Lingu Valley anymore. Furthermore, it is very likely that you will be chased out tomorrow. After returning to the stone house, Yueru seemed to be somewhat worried as she spoke to Xiao Yu. It doesn't matter to me. At most, I will just move to another village, Xiao Yu said casually. Indeed, after this incident, Xiao Yu no longer had any hope of joining the Lingu Valley. He really did not have to join the Lingu Valley. However, he had already thought about it. When the deputy village chief brought people to chase him out, he would teach them a lesson. However, he never expected that the next day, Yueru would jog all the way to him and tell him that his request to join the Lingu Valley had been approved by the old village chief and the deputy village chief. Furthermore, the deputy village chief did not seem to have any objections at all. After thinking about it carefully, Xiao Yu realized that the deputy village chief was probably afraid that he would not be able to find a chance to take revenge on him after he left. Thus, he decided to keep him here and use his power and advantage in the Lingu Valley to punish him. You'd better not do anything overboard. I am not Kong Ping, Xiao Yu thought to himself after thinking things through. After resting quietly for a period of time, the old village chief came looking for him. He said to Xiao Lingyu, anyone who wants to join the Linggu Valley must first complete a mission. This mission is to go out of the village alone and hunt down 5 ordinary wolf demons. This is very simple for you, but you should still do it according to the village rules. Xiao Lingyu naturally would not reject such a simple mission. The next day, he left the Linggu Valley's main gate to search for wolf demons alone. There were many wolf demons near the Linggu Valley. Naturally, finding wolf demons was not a difficult task. Xiao Lingyu used less than half a day to successfully return to the Linggu Valley. When he handed over the 5 well-preserved wolf demon corpses to the old village chief, the old village chief announced that he was already a villager of the Linggu Valley. Chapter 505. The Linggu Valley had about 6,000 people. All of them were humans. 4,000 of them were male cultivators, and 2,000 were female cultivators. Among the nearly 6,000 people, less than 20 of them had ascended from the lower realm. Most of the people in Lin Valley Village had grown up in the God realm. Almost all of them were born with the cultivation of true gods. Because of the imbalance between the sexes and the danger of going out to hunt, the Linggu Valley was unable to expand and could only barely maintain its size. Fortunately, most of the female cultivators in the village were not like those in the immortal, devil, and monster realms who refused to marry easily. The situation of the lower-level cultivators in the God realm forced them to find a home. In the God realm, the female cultivators were only responsible for giving birth to children. Generally, they would not go out to hunt. To them, this was a kind of protection and also for the long-term development of the village. In the divine realm, as long as one could eat and drink to their heart's content, there would never be a day where one's life essence would be exhausted. In other words, immortality was the same as immortality. Therefore, the cultivators at the bottom did not feel much pressure. This was also one of the reasons why female cultivators were willing to marry and give birth to children. In order to encourage marriage and giving birth, there were many rules in the village. There were many practical rewards for marriage and giving birth to children. The situation in the few villages near the Linggu Valley was more or less the same. There were more men than women. As for the situation in the God realm, no one knew. Generally speaking, newborn children did not need to go out to hunt. In other words, those deity cultivators basically ate and drank for free in the village. After all, an ordinary wolf demon's cultivation was around the great god stage. Deity cultivators would not be able to go out to hunt. However, there were also some deity cultivators who would go out. But most of them would follow a group of great god stage seniors to gain experience and gain experience. The women and deity cultivators in the village did not need to go out. Therefore, the cultivators who went out to hunt would have to hand over some meat to feed these idle people. Regarding this point, even those single men did not have any objections. This was all information that Xiao Lingyu gradually learned after he became a villager in the Linggu Valley. Most of it was also told to him by Kong Ping and Yueru. After a woman gets married, what if her husband encounters danger and dies while out hunting? Xiao Lingyu asked. Of course it's to choose another marriage. After all, there are many men in the village. Women don't have to worry about not being able to get married, even if they are already married, Yueru explained with a smile. Actually, there are many women who have been married many times. After all, everyone is immortal in theory. If a woman is widowed, she would have to be widowed for too long. This is too cruel for her. Therefore, the villagers will only sympathize with a woman who remarries. They won't discriminate against her, Kong Ping added. Then, is there a man who marries several women? Xiao Lingyu asked curiously. There is, but it's very rare. Moreover, there's a rule in the village. If a man wants to marry more than one woman, other than the first wife, he can only marry a widow who has already been married and whose husband has died. On this point, almost no one in our village has ever violated it, Yueru replied. Xiao Lingyu nodded, indicating that he understood. Then he said, this small village in the realm of the gods is really not much different from a mortal village. The only difference is that the cultivators in the realm of the gods are very indifferent to carnal desires. Most of them marry and have children for the sake of dual cultivation and nurturing their descendants. Sigh, actually, if this goes on, what's the difference between us and those mortals? At most, we'll just live a little longer. However, it'll only be a longer ordinary life. It's dull and gray, and there's no hope at all, Yuuru said with a sigh. It's not that there's no hope. How vast is the immortal realm? As long as we can cultivate to the heavenly god tier, we'll be able to leave this village and experience the outside world to seek more opportunities, Kong Ping said with great ambition. Let's not talk about how difficult it is to cultivate to the realm of the gods. Even if we really manage to cultivate to the realm of the gods, we might lose our lives not long after leaving the village. The outside world is very big and very exciting, but it's also very dangerous. Yuuru shook his head and smiled bitterly. Haha, that depends on what you think. If you want to live a peaceful life, just stay in this village. If you want to improve and seek opportunities, then you naturally have to take risks, Kong Ping said with a smile. After Xiao Lingyu stayed in the Linggu Valley for a period of time, the few groups of cultivators who had gone out to hunt all returned one after another. However, what they did not expect was that almost every group had suffered great losses. After asking carefully, they found out that almost all the groups that the Linggu Valley had sent out to hunt last time had encountered large groups of silver-armored cultivators. Moreover, those silver-armored cultivators had attacked them without saying a word. It was as if they had a deep grudge against the Linggu Valley. The cultivators of the Linggu Valley were very experienced in dealing with wolf demons. As long as they did not encounter large groups of wolf demons or a silver-haired wolf king, they would not suffer too many losses. However, they lacked experience in fighting against other cultivators. In addition, the silver-armored cultivators had a greater advantage in numbers every time they attacked, so the Linggu Valley's hunting teams were in such a miserable state this time. It was very obvious that those silver-armored cultivators had a purpose. They had premeditated and prepared to attack the Linggu Valley's hunting teams. It was almost as if they were declaring war on the Linggu Valley with their actions. After hearing this news from Yuuru, Xiao Lingyu was a little surprised and asked, "Are those silver-armored cultivators from the nearby villages?" The injured had been sent to the few stone houses next to the herb garden to recuperate. Naturally, Yuuru was the first to receive a lot of information. Yes, they're from Silver Moon Village, which is only 30,000 kilometers away from us. Yuuru nodded and replied, "Is Silver Moon Village very strong?" Xiao Lingyu frowned and asked again. "They're a little stronger than our Linggu Valley. They have close to 10,000 people." Yuuru replied, "For some reason, ever since Xiao Lingyu stood up for Kong Pingxiang last time, Yuuru often came to chat with him. It seemed that Yuuru admired Xiao Lingyu's righteous and courageous character from the bottom of his heart, so he was willing to interact more with Xiao Lingyu. I don't know how the village is going to deal with this. If they dare to attack us, then they must have something to rely on," Xiao Lingyu said worriedly, as if he really thought of himself as a person from the Linggu Valley. This time, Silver Moon Village's actions are too despicable. I think the village will definitely gather the villagers to take revenge on them," Yuuru said. Just as Yuuru said, the village chief quickly gathered all the villagers of the square. Then, the village chief stood on a high platform and reprimanded the cultivators of Silver Moon Village. He said that in the future, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. However, he didn't say how or when. But these words of reprimand couldn't be heard by the people of Silver Moon Village. Apart from letting the people of the Linggu Valley secretly sigh in relief, it didn't have any practical effect. However, after the gathering, the anger of the Linggu Valley villagers subsided quite a bit. "It seems like this matter is going to be left unsettled," Xiao Lingyu said with a smile. After waiting for more than 10 days, he didn't see any big movements from the Linggu Valley. They weren't as strong as the other party, so they definitely wouldn't be able to gain any advantage if they fought head-on. Other than reprimanding them, what else could the people of the Linggu Valley do? They couldn't possibly attack Silver Moon Village, could they? If they were to go to war, the casualties would definitely be huge. In order to fill their stomachs and survive, these cultivators at the bottom of the god realm might go out and hunt with all their might. However, if they were asked to fight and sacrifice themselves, they would definitely not be too willing. Xiao Yu had already become a villager of the Linggu Valley. Naturally, he didn't have the right to eat and drink for free. Furthermore, he had the obligation to provide for the women and the weak in the village. Hence, a month after he came to Silver Moon Village, he went out to hunt with a group of villagers. Every once in a while, the Linggu Valley would send out a group of cultivators to hunt. Each group had about 500 people. There were about 6 groups of 500 people in the entire village. They took turns to hunt, and after each group of 500 people left the village, they would split into more than 10 small groups. Each group had about 30 people. Xiao Yu was in one of the small groups, and the villagers in this small group were all on good terms with Kongping. However, the difference was that the small groups that went out to hunt this time had a total of 50 people. The scale of the small groups was much larger than before. The main purpose of the small groups was to prevent any sneak attacks from outsiders. With Xiao Yu in the group, his small group naturally wouldn't be in danger. Even if Xiao Yu didn't deliberately show off, he would still be able to protect the safety of this group of villagers. Because the people of Silver Moon Village had previously ambushed the hunting groups of Linggu Valley, everyone was very cautious and careful. They had always been hunting in the outskirts of the secret territory. They weren't in a rush to succeed. Xiao Yu also wouldn't encourage everyone to take risks just because he was relatively strong. All the hunting activities were carried out step by step. Because there were no casualties, the fighting strength of the small groups was not affected. Hence, everyone's harvest naturally increased. Everyone's faces were full of smiles. Everyone could keep the rest of their harvest, except for a portion that had to be handed over. And the amount that they had to hand over was fixed. Hence, the greater their harvest, the more they could keep for themselves. A month after leaving the Linggu Valley, Xiao Yu's small group had just surrounded and killed a group of dozens of wolf demons. Suddenly, dozens of streams of light suddenly flew towards them from all directions. Although this attack came very suddenly, it flew over from 1,000 feet away. Everyone still had time to react and put up a defense. The divine sense of a great soul stage cultivator could be used to guard 1,000 feet around him. These sudden sneak attacks could only be carried out from 1,000 feet away. Otherwise, it would be easy to be exposed in advance. Xiao Yu's eyes were sharp and his hands were fast. Those streams of light had just flown over when he had already struck out a circle of primal chaos seal, blowing up the dozens of streams of light. The remaining streaks of light were received by the other 40 or so teammates. The opponent's sudden sneak attack only injured 3 people in Xiao Yu's group. Chapter 506. With Xiao Yu in the team, the operation of the Silver Armor Cultivators could only end in a crushing defeat. After leaving behind nearly 80 corpses, only a dozen or so people fled in panic. Xiao Yu's team only had 2 people killed in battle, and a dozen or so were seriously injured. Although Xiao Yu was powerful in such a chaotic situation, it was impossible for her to take care of everyone's safety. It was inevitable that there would be casualties in the team. After cleaning up the battlefield, no one was in the mood to hunt again. Moreover, they had already gained a lot this time. In addition, they also wanted to report the incident of the Silver Moon Village cultivators to the village chief, so everyone unanimously decided that it was time to return to the village. The journey back had been very safe and peaceful, but at this moment, the Linggu Valley was very noisy and lively. From everyone's words, it could be seen that of the 10 teams that went out this time, except for Xiao Yu's team, almost all of them had been ambushed by the Silver Armored Cultivators from Silver Moon Village and suffered heavy casualties. The villagers who were injured last time had yet to recover. This time, close to 200 people had died outside, and 200 more were injured. This had already damaged the vitality of the Linggu Valley. It was no wonder that the entire village was furious. They could tolerate it once, but if it happened again, the villagers of the Linggu Valley would not be able to tolerate it. If they did not take effective action, who would dare to go out to hunt again in the future? Even if everyone mustered up their courage and went out again, they would still be surrounded and killed, and there would still be heavy casualties. There were only so many people in the Lingu Valley. How many times could they be killed? As for how the Lingu Valley would deal with this matter, Xiao Lingyu could not control it, and there was no need for her to worry about it. The actions of Silver Moon Village had definitely crossed the bottom line of the Lingu Valley, not only for their dignity, but also for their survival in the future. The Lingu Valley had to fight back. This was also the thought of the entire village. The village chief and the deputy village chief gathered all the villagers who could fight together. These villagers were actually the large groups that took turns to hunt. Except for those who were injured, all of them gathered together. Then, the village chief and the deputy village chief reorganized them in batches. There were more than 2,500 people in total. They were divided into 8 teams, each with about 300 people. After the team was reorganized, the old village chief led everyone to a smooth stone wall at the back of the valley. Then, he formed a hand seal and chanted an incantation, causing a cave entrance to appear on the stone wall. All the Lingu Valley cultivators, including Xiao Lingyu, were dressed in standard metal armor. They entered the relatively spacious cave one after another and proceeded forward slowly. Everyone's expression was very solemn, because this time they were not going out to hunt, but to fight. This was something that had not happened for many years. The defensive power of the metal armor was actually not very strong. It was just an ordinary low-grade defensive artifact. However, these cultivators did not have a strong physical body like Xiao Lingyu, so the low-grade defensive artifact was still very useful for them. Before they reached the end of the cave, there were already 8 forks. Each team of 300 people chose a fork and continued forward. To Xiao Lingyu's surprise, the deputy village chief stayed with her team. Needless to say, most of the cultivators in this team were definitely on the deputy village chief's side. Soon, they reached the end of the forked cave. After everyone worked together to push aside a huge rock, they saw very dense shrubs intertwined together, blocking the exit. The deputy village chief took the lead and used a sharp sword to cut the shrubs apart. Everyone followed behind him and left the cave. After everyone left the cave, the deputy village chief used a spell to move the shrubs back to their original positions and restored them to their original state. There was no abnormality at all, so naturally they could not see the cave hidden under the shrubs. With everyone gathered together, the cultivators of Silver Moon Village would definitely not act rashly. Therefore, this time, the Lingu Valley cultivators needed to search for the cultivators of Silver Moon Village. Then, they would learn from the cultivators of Silver Moon Village and quietly approach the enemy, then suddenly launch a sneak attack. Therefore, whether this mission would be effective or not depended on whether they could find the cultivators of Silver Moon Village. Furthermore, they had to surround and kill them in the dense forest before they noticed and retreated. To search for the enemy's tracks, they naturally could not gather everyone together. They could only send people to search in all directions. The deputy village chief was in this team, so the responsibility of leading the team naturally fell to him. Of course, he also had the authority to divide the work among everyone. Under the deputy village chief's instructions, Xiao Lingyu and the other 7 cultivators were selected. The 8 of them would split up to search for the enemy's tracks. Xiao Lingyu did not raise any objections. Instead, he chose a direction and quietly snuck away. This kind of search was actually very dangerous because the enemy was not here to hunt, but to surround and kill the cultivators of the Lingu Valley. Therefore, they would also send people to search in all directions. Their team would also be very careful. When the team stopped or moved, they would definitely send people to guard the area. If Xiao Lingyu and the other Lingu Valley scouts were careless, they could be discovered by the enemy. Then, there was an 80 to 90% chance that they would not be able to return alive. Moreover, there were countless wolf demons in this dense forest. If the cultivators moved alone in the dense forest and encountered a large group of wolf demons, it would also be difficult for them to escape. Many times, inexperienced cultivators would only die if they moved alone in the dense forest. The deputy village chief clearly knew that Xiao Yu had just joined the Lingu Valley, but still sent him out to investigate. It was most likely that he wanted Xiao Yu to die. Xiao Yu was not afraid of being discovered by the enemy. He was also not afraid of the wolf demons in the dense forest. Therefore, while he was careful, he moved much faster and could search a wider area. No matter what, Xiao Yu was already a villager of the Lingu Valley. Even if he did not have much feelings for the Lingu Valley, at least under the current circumstances, he definitely had to stand on the side of the Lingu Valley. Since he had decided to stand on this side, Xiao Yu would do his best to do what he should do. This had always been his principle. While moving through the dense forest, Xiao Yu often encountered wolf demons. However, those wolf demons could not stop him at all, let alone cause him harm. In fact, if he was accidentally surrounded by a large group of wolf demons, it was not his misfortune, but the wolf demon's misfortune. He did not mind replenishing his meat while carrying out his mission. Moreover, Xiao Yu's condition deteriorated much slower than that of an ordinary Great Soul Stage cultivator. He did not need to eat once every 20 hours. This could save him time and maximize his chances of being discovered by the enemy. Xiao Yu could go days and nights without eating, but other Great Soul Stage cultivators could not. They had to stop and eat once in a while, which also made it easier for Xiao Yu to search. 3 days after Xiao Yu left the group, he finally found a group of silver-armored cultivators. Just as Xiao Yu discovered them, the cultivator in charge of guarding the group also discovered him. Therefore, before he could do anything, the others had already raised their guard and quickly moved towards him. There were more than 100 people on the other side, and they had just finished eating. They were all in good condition. Although Xiao Yu was not afraid of them, he was not in the mood to fight alone. He quickly retreated while sending a message to the deputy village chief. According to the previous agreement, after receiving the message, the deputy village chief would bring people or send people to surround and kill the enemy. However, Xiao Yu led this group of silver-armored cultivators around the dense forest for nearly a day, but no large group of cultivators from the Lingu Valley came. Xiao Yu could guess that it was not that the deputy village chief did not receive his message, but that his message had been ignored. Xiao Yu could actually shake off this group of silver-armored cultivators at any time, but he felt that giving up now would not only be a waste of his time and effort, but also a waste of an opportunity. Therefore, he still appeared in the vicinity of this group of silver-armored cultivators from time to time, allowing them to chase after him. Xiao Yu contacted a Lingu Valley villager in his group that he was familiar with. From this, he was able to determine the exact location of his group. Therefore, he led this group of silver-armored cultivators closer to the group. If you don't take the initiative to come over, I will directly lead the enemy to you. With this thought in mind, Xiao Yu circled around the dense forest with this group of silver-armored cultivators. This group of silver-armored cultivators also had their own mission. They also knew that their group could not be led by a single person, but that person would always appear and constantly harass them. They had no choice but to chase after him every time. Moreover, this group of silver-armored cultivators felt that their position had been exposed, so they had to constantly change their position. It would be best if they could kill that person to prevent that person from exposing their group's position. In this way, Xiao Yu was able to lead this group of silver-armored cultivators. After all, the group led by the deputy village chief was constantly moving, so Xiao Yu's route was not a straight line. This could also reduce the group of silver-armored cultivators' suspicions. After circling around for nearly a month, Xiao Yu finally led this group of silver-armored cultivators to the vicinity of the deputy village chief's group. Then he sent a message to the deputy village chief and also sent the same warning to his familiar teammates. The enemy was not far away, so the deputy village chief naturally could not ignore Xiao Yu's message. Therefore, he led 300 people to surround Xiao Yu. When the group of silver-armored cultivators saw the Lingu Valley's group, they knew that they had fallen into a trap. Therefore, they immediately retreated. However, at this moment, Xiao Lingyu blocked their path and repeatedly blasted out primal chaos seals at them. The battle of 300 against 100 began. The Linggu Valley had the advantage in numbers, and with experts like Xiao Lingyu and the deputy village chief, the 100 or so silver armor cultivators were naturally unable to resist. In the end, only one person was lucky enough to escape. The rest of the silver armor cultivators were all killed on the spot. Of the 300 people from the Linggu Valley, 5 died and 30 were injured. In comparison, the price paid was very small. Chapter 507. Xiao Lingyu only smiled and brushed off the deputy village chief's words and attitude. He didn't want any rewards. He just wanted to do something for the Linggu Valley, so that when he asked the old village chief for the map in the future, the old village chief would readily agree. The Linggu Valley's operation ended very quickly, because the silver-armored cultivators from Silver Moon Village had already been alerted to the Linggu Valley's counterattack. They either escaped or went into hiding, making it difficult for the Linggu Valley's brigades to find another opportunity. However, other than Xiao Lingyu's brigade, only 2 other brigades managed to find the cultivators from Silver Moon Village. In other words, the Linggu Valley had mobilized 8 brigades of 300 people, but in reality, they had only fought 3 battles. Other than Xiao Lingyu's brigade, which had achieved complete victory, the other 2 brigades had each killed more than 50 silver armor cultivators. The number of people who had died in the Linggu Valley was actually about the same as the number of people who had died in Silver Moon Village. This time, Silver Moon Village had brazenly attacked the Linggu Valley, but neither side had gained any advantage. They had only lost a few hundred villagers for nothing. The people of the Linggu Valley couldn't be sure whether the cultivators from Silver Moon Village had already retreated, but for the sake of their livelihood, they had to continue hunting. However, the number of people in each hunting team in the Linggu Valley had to be above 100. The harvest of a 100-man team in a month was actually less than that of 3 teams of 30 people, because the hunting range of a 100-man team was actually about the same as that of a team of 30 people. In this way, the rate of meat replenishment in the Linggu Valley would greatly decrease. This was definitely not a long-term solution. However, any village or any large team would definitely have some savings. The Linggu Valley was naturally the same, so the Linggu Valley could still hold on for a while. In the eyes of the villagers of the Linggu Valley, Silver Moon Village had also suffered. They knew that the Linggu Valley wasn't a weakling that they could bully. Silver Moon Village probably wouldn't dare to casually attack the Linggu Valley again, so the 100-man team's helplessness shouldn't last for too long. However, Silver Moon Village didn't seem to be prepared to give up. After 2 months, a 100-man team that went out to hunt in the Linggu Valley was once again attacked by a large group of silver-armored cultivators. This team of 100 people from the Linggu Valley only sent out a message, but not a single person returned alive. This proved that the enemy's numbers far exceeded theirs. The villagers of the Linggu Valley were once again enraged. More than 2,000 villagers wearing iron armor, under the lead of the old village chief and deputy village chief, silently left the Linggu Valley through a secret passage. They went to the dense forest to find the cultivators of Silver Moon Village and settle the score. However, Silver Moon Village seemed to have already predicted that the Linggu Valley would retaliate. The 2,000 people from the Linggu Valley searched bitterly for nearly 3 months, but still couldn't find a trace of the Silver Moon Village cultivators. The Linggu Valley's iron-armored cultivators could only dejectedly return to the village. In a secret room, dozens of Linggu Valley cultivators gathered together. These cultivators were the stewards of large families or large teams. They were also the more prestigious people in the village. If this continues, not only will our meat replenishment be a problem, but our manpower will also gradually be depleted, the deputy village chief said worriedly. Does anyone have a good idea? The old village chief asked everyone. Everyone frowned. It seemed that they didn't have a good idea to solve this problem. Xiao Lingyu, Kong Ping, and Yuuru were all present, but the three of them didn't have any intention of speaking. They really didn't have a good idea. If there's no better idea, then we can only use their own methods against them, the deputy village chief said with narrowed eyes. Oh, the old village chief was a little confused. If Silver Moon Village can do this to us, then we can also do the same to them. They can keep watch near our village and wait for an opportunity to surround and kill our villagers. Why can't we keep watch outside their village? It's not like they don't need to hunt, the deputy village chief said with a cold smile. When everyone heard this, they felt that it made sense and silently nodded. The old village chief pondered for a moment and said, "If we don't send enough people, I'm afraid we'll be counterattacked. If we send too many people, our valley will be defenseless. If they take advantage of this opportunity to invade, or if a large group of wolf demons and flying beasts attack like last time, our valley will most likely be breached. We were able to leave the valley previously because we didn't go far. If the village encounters an emergency, we can quickly rush back to help. However, Silver Moon Village is still a little far from our Lingu Valley. But other than this method, what else can we do? Do we continue to watch as the villagers are continuously surrounded and killed? Or do we use a large team of 1,000 people to hunt in the future?" The deputy village chief asked repeatedly. Everyone fell into silence. "I think we should vote on it," the deputy village chief suddenly suggested after everyone was silent for a while. The Lingu Valley did have an old rule, and that was when people didn't agree, they would vote to reach a consensus. This vote seemed to be the most reasonable choice. At this moment, Xiaoling Yu interrupted and said, "I feel that there are still many suspicious points in this matter. For example, why did Silver Moon Village suddenly attack our Lingu Valley? For example, how many people do they have around our village? We should clarify these suspicious points before deciding on the next course of action. The best strategy is to plan before acting." Xiaoling Yu's words made Yueru and Kong Ping secretly nod their heads. However, many of the other Lingu Valley cultivators frowned. These cultivators frowned not because Xiaoling Yu's words were unreasonable, but because he had just joined the Lingu Valley not long ago. It was not easy for these people in charge of the Lingu Valley to accept him speaking in this kind of situation. They were used to listening to the village chief and deputy village chief's arrangements. They didn't want to speak and didn't like to listen to others speak. Xiaoling Yu's words are reasonable. However, how would we know what Silver Moon Village is thinking? How many people they have around our village is definitely a highly confidential matter. It's not easy to find out. Previously, we had thought of capturing the people from Silver Moon Village alive. Unfortunately, even if we did, they would immediately commit suicide. The deputy village chief shook his head as he spoke. Since no one liked what he said, Xiaoling Yu didn't have the heart to say more. In the end, they voted, although Xiaoling Yu and a few others voted against it. As they didn't want a large number of Lingu Valley villagers to take the risk, most of the people in the room still felt that they had to go to Silver Moon Village to attack them. In everyone's opinion, the Lingu Valley didn't know Silver Moon Village's motive. They also didn't know how many people they had near their village. How would they know when the Lingu Valley would be empty? How would they know how many people the Lingu Valley had sent out this time? Other than the injured, there were less than 2,300 villagers left in Lin Valley Village who used to go hunting. For safety's sake, the old village chief left 500 men to guard the village and only took 1,800 men with him. Silver Moon Village was indeed quite far from the Lingu Valley. However, with the experienced old village chief leading the team, everyone took a safer route. Although they took some detours, they weren't attacked by large groups of demon beasts along the way. Therefore, their speed was very fast. However, even so, it took nearly 2 months for the 1,800 Lingu Valley cultivators to reach the dense forest beside Silver Moon Village. On the way here, the old village chief and deputy village chief naturally kept in contact with the Lingu Valley. As long as there was any movement, everyone would immediately turn back. Silver Moon Village wasn't in the valley. Instead, It was on the peak of a mountain that was only 500 feet tall. The peak of the mountain wasn't flat. The villagers of Silver Moon Village all lived in caves on the peak of the mountain. At the highest point of the mountain, there was a very strange-looking boulder. The boulder was silver in color and shaped like a crescent moon. It would even emit a silver-white fluorescence at night. Thus, the mountain was named Silver Moon Mountain, and the village at the top of the mountain was named Silver Moon Village. Silver Moon Mountain wasn't tall, but the mountain was very large. Although Silver Moon Village was on the peak, its overall size was definitely bigger than the Lingu Valley's valley. Not far from the foot of Silver Moon Mountain, there was a large river that flowed endlessly. The river's flow was very fast, and the river was tens of thousands of feet wide. The rumbling of the water was like a series of thunder. Even from afar, one could hear it clearly. It was really unknown whether the sound of the water had any effect on the lives and cultivation of the cultivators in Silver Moon Village. The river originally flowed straight, but when it reached Silver Moon Mountain, it suddenly turned 90 degrees. This caused both sides of Silver Moon Mountain to face the river. On the opposite side of Silver Moon Mountain was a very vast forest. It was also an important hunting area for Silver Moon Village. The cultivators of Silver Moon Village couldn't fly across the river, and there was no bridge over the river. The cultivators of Silver Moon Village could only cross by boat. At this moment, the cultivators of the Lingu Valley could see from afar that there were about 10 small boats on the river. They were quickly sailing towards the opposite side of the river. There were many wolf demons on the other side of the river, but they had to travel a long way to find them. The nearby wolf demons had already been mostly killed by the cultivators of Silver Moon Village. Under normal circumstances, the cultivators of Silver Moon Village would go to the opposite side of the river to hunt. If the Lingu Valley wanted to take revenge on Silver Moon Village and kill the cultivators of Silver Moon Village, they had to cross the river. The old village chief then led everyone along the river, with their backs facing Silver Moon Mountain. After traveling for almost a day, the old village chief finally stopped. Then, he took out the boat-shaped magic treasure that he had prepared long ago and led everyone across the river. When they reached the forest, the old village chief and the deputy village chief split everyone into 6 teams of 300 people and let everyone search for their own targets. In less than 10 days of searching in this forest, they had only killed a few dozen villagers of Silver Moon Village. However, the old village chief received a message from the village. Chapter 508. There were only 500 cultivators left in the Lingu Valley who had some fighting experience. The rest were women and children who hadn't reached the great divinity stage. There were more than 4,000 people left in the Lingu Valley, but their combined fighting power was estimated to be less than 2,000 silver-armored cultivators. If they fought head-on, they wouldn't be a match for 3,000 silver-armored cultivators. Fortunately, the Lingu Valley's terrain was special. It was easy to defend and difficult to attack. It wouldn't be easy for the enemy to kill their way in. After the village head and deputy village head received the news, they first gathered all the cultivators they had brought out and rushed back at full speed. On the way back, Xiao Lingyu reminded the village head and deputy village head that it was very likely that it was too late to return now. It was better to find another way to resolve this matter. After all, even if they traveled at full speed, it would take them at least 40 days to return. If the silver-armored cultivators were really determined to break into the Lingu Valley, it wouldn't even take 40 days. The village head and deputy village head naturally asked Xiao Lingyu if he had any good ideas. Xiao Lingyu thought of a story from Earth. Besiege Wei to rescue Zhao. Therefore, he suggested that the 1,800 armored cultivators feign an attack on Silver Moon Village and act as if they were going to die together, forcing the silver-armored cultivators to come back and save themselves. However, this suggestion was rejected by the deputy village head. He even berated Xiao Lingyu for gambling with the lives of his fellow villagers. If the silver-armored cultivators didn't come back, the 1,800 armored cultivators would completely lose the chance to save the Lingu Valley. Furthermore, the deputy village head felt that the 1,800 armored cultivators alone wouldn't be a threat to the safety of Silver Moon Village. He even asserted that there were at least 2,000 silver-armored cultivators guarding the village. The deputy village head was very certain, and his words weren't without reason. Naturally, Xiao Lingyu's suggestion wasn't taken seriously. Xiao Lingyu was only doing his part and offering a strategy. He didn't expect the village head and deputy village head to really listen to him, so he didn't say anything else. In Xiao Lingyu's opinion, even if there were still 2,000 silver-armored cultivators in Silver Moon Village, as long as there weren't any heavenly divinity experts among them, he would be able to break through Silver Moon Village's defensive line with his 1,800 armored cultivators. After traveling day and night for half a month, the armored cultivators in Linggu Valley had already covered half of the distance. Everyone was a little tired. Xiao Lingyu suggested that they should take a proper rest, or else, even if they made it back in time. Otherwise, even if they were to return in time, they would still be in their condition and would be defeated. Tease. As the only medicine master in Linggu Valley, Yueru naturally had to follow the army. After all, there would be casualties in battle, and they needed her timely and effective treatment. Actually, what I'm most worried about is that we're traveling at such a fast speed. Moreover, there are too few people patrolling the road ahead. It's very easy for us to fall into the enemy's ambush, Xiao Lingyu said to Yueru after he was pulled aside. The village head should be able to think of this. Don't worry about it. Don't offend the deputy village head. Yueru kindly advised. It's not that I want to go against anyone. It's just that I've always been so passive. It doesn't feel good. Xiao Lingyu said worriedly. Don't worry, there won't be any problems. Yueru, who wasn't very calculative, seemed to always be this optimistic. Xiao Lingyu, on the other hand, was not optimistic. His intuition told him that something big was going to happen in Linggu Valley this time. After thinking carefully, Xiao Lingyu greeted Yueru and took the initiative to go to the front of the army to take charge of scouting and guarding. Originally, there were only 3 armored cultivators who were sent to the front to scout. They were sent to the front and the 2 sides to scout. Furthermore, they were only 40 to 50 miles away from the main army. The area they could scout was very small, and the enemy could easily avoid or discover them. Xiao Lingyu was very fast, so the area he could move around was very large. He wasn't an expert in scouting and guarding, so he could only move quickly and expand the area he could scout. 2 days passed. Xiao Lingyu didn't discover anything unusual. However, when he stopped to eat and rest, 4 rays of light suddenly flew towards him. It was obvious that he had been exposed. Furthermore, the enemy had deliberately waited for him to be in a bad state to attack. For many low-level cultivators in the realm of the gods, they were at their worst when they stopped to eat. Xiao Lingyu's condition wasn't actually deteriorating. He had calculated that his condition would deteriorate in 4 hours, so he stopped to eat. A cautious person like him wouldn't wait until his condition started to deteriorate to replenish his energy. The 4 rays of light were arrows shot from crossbows. In the blink of an eye, they were in front of Xiao Lingyu. However, Xiao Lingyu suddenly rose from the ground, and the 4 rays of light exploded at his feet. What surprised Xiao Lingyu was that there should have been 4 people on the other side, but after they shot the 4 arrows, they actually fled. He didn't know if it was because they were too confident in these 4 arrows, or if they originally had the attitude of retreating if they didn't attack. Xiao Lingyu quickly moved around and searched carefully. However, he still couldn't find the cultivator who had shot the arrows at him. Whether it was the shape or the material of the 4 arrows, they were exactly the same as the arrows used by the silver-armored cultivators. Therefore, he was almost certain that these arrows were from Silver Moon Village. In other words, there were people from Silver Moon Village nearby. The ones who had shot the arrows were probably their scouts. There were 4 people on guard in one direction. There must be a lot of people in their team. Xiao Lingyu immediately sent a message to the village chief and continued to investigate. Not long after, the village chief replied to Xiao Lingyu and asked him to slowly retreat while continuing to investigate. This was because the Linggu Valley team was preparing to take a detour to avoid the possible ambush ahead. This time, the Linggu Valley team finally trusted Xiaolingyu. However, Xiaolingyu didn't expect that less than a day after he slowly retreated and hadn't returned to the team, the village chief sent a message that the team had been attacked and asked Xiaolingyu to hurry back to support them. After receiving the message, Xiaolingyu temporarily put down his guard and rushed back at full speed. After 6 hours, he finally found the Linggu Valley team that had taken a detour. However, the situation of the Linggu Valley team was very bad. They had already been forced into a small rift valley by more than 2,000 silver armor cultivators. They could only rely on the narrow entrance of the rift valley, which made it easy to defend and difficult to attack. However, they couldn't fight their way out. What made Xiaolingyu even more depressed was that as soon as he rushed to the entrance of the rift valley to help the cultivators on his side, more than 2,000 silver-armored cultivators followed him and charged over. Furthermore, it gave people the illusion that these 2,000 silver-armored cultivators were brought over by Xiaolingyu. As for why these 2,000 silver-armored cultivators would follow him closely, Xiaolingyu felt that it was definitely a coincidence. However, Xiaolingyu didn't think too much about it. He just waved the silver moon broken sword and charged into the enemy's group, approaching the entrance of the Rift Valley step by step. Although Xiaolingyu was also in the Great Soul stage, his overall strength was very strong and his body's defense was very high. The opponent's weapons couldn't break through his skin at all. He advanced at an extremely fast speed, as if there was no one around, and quickly rushed to the entrance of the Rift Valley. However, what he didn't expect was that as soon as he reached the entrance of the Rift Valley, not only did the Linggu Valley cultivators in charge of guarding the entrance not let him in, they even shot a dozen sharp iron arrows at him. As he didn't expect this, he didn't have time to dodge. After all, the distance was too close. These dozen iron arrows all landed on Xiaolingyu's body. Although they didn't penetrate his body and even made him feel a little pain, he was still angry. He had done his best for Lin Valley Village and had even rushed in to help at a time like this. How could they shoot arrows at him? Even if they didn't shoot at him on purpose and had only accidentally shot him when they were killing those silver-armored cultivators, why would those dozens of iron arrows be aimed at him? Although Xiaolingyu was angry, he would never lose his mind in the middle of a fight. Therefore, he didn't rush into the Rift Valley to settle the score with the Linggu Valley cultivators. Instead, he directly turned around and rushed out of the battlefield. There were almost 5,000 silver-armored cultivators blocking the entrance of the Rift Valley, but they still couldn't kill Xiaolingyu because Xiaolingyu was in their group. They couldn't launch a collective attack for fear of accidentally injuring people from the same village. Therefore, Xiaolingyu easily killed his way out of the battlefield. Perhaps because they saw Xiaolingyu's power, those silver-armored cultivators didn't send anyone to kill Xiaolingyu. After Xiaolingyu killed his way out, he didn't leave. Instead, he jumped onto a big tree and watched quietly from afar. At the same time, he was thinking. Not long after, Xiaolingyu had already thought of something. Those 2,000 silver-armored cultivators who arrived at the same time as him must have been lying in ambush on the path of the Linggu Valley army. They were waiting for the Linggu Valley cultivators to fall into their ambush. However, after receiving his warning, the Linggu Valley cultivators decided to take a detour, causing their ambush to be useless. The 2,000 silver-armored cultivators who arrived later should be part of the 3,000 silver-armored cultivators who attacked the Linggu Valley. As for the 2,000 silver-armored cultivators who blocked the Linggu Valley army in the Rift Valley earlier, they should be from Silver Moon Village, which was stationed at Silver Moon Mountain. This group of silver-armored cultivators might have received news that the Linggu Valley people had surrounded and killed the villagers who were out hunting. It was even more likely that they had planned this beforehand. The people from Silver Moon Village had used a series of plans. Now, it seemed that their goal was to eliminate the main force of the Linggu Valley army. Furthermore, the current situation was extremely advantageous to them. They weren't far from success. Xiaolingyu felt that there must be someone in Silver Moon Village who was very good at scheming. Their plan was almost flawless, and Linggu Village had been completely tricked by them. They had been led by the nose all along. Just now, the people from the Lingu Valley had shot arrows at them, probably because they had chosen to take a detour due to the warning he had given them. However, after taking a detour, they had fallen into an ambush. However, what Xiaoling Yu didn't understand was that since they had taken a detour, the Lingu Valley army should have had many choices. Why had they chosen to fall into an ambush? Chapter 509. Although the Lingu Valley had fewer people, they were still defending the entrance of the Rift Valley. The entrance was very narrow and could only fit 3 or 4 people side by side. This made it impossible for the silver-armored cultivators to show their advantage in numbers, at least in a short period of time. In the beginning, both sides used crossbows to shoot at each other, but these crossbows would eventually be used up. The silver-armored cultivators charged forward with silver shields for a while, but they couldn't break through the enemy's defenses no matter how hard they tried. So they retreated a little and stopped attacking. After some adjustments, a portion of the silver-armored cultivators blocked the entrance of the Rift Valley, while the rest climbed to the top of the 2 sides of the Rift Valley. The silver-armored cultivators at the entrance of the Rift Valley only stared and got into formation. Meanwhile, the silver-armored cultivators at the top of the 2 sides of the Rift Valley continuously threw down boulders and shot down arrows. The Lingu Valley cultivators looked like they had nothing to worry about, but in reality, they were like turtles in a jar. This was because there was no way out of this Rift Valley. They were surrounded by steep cliffs on all sides, and there was only a very narrow exit in front of them. But now it was completely blocked. Fortunately, the interior of the Rift Valley was quite spacious. The Lingu Valley cultivators could easily dodge the boulders and arrows that came from the top of the Rift Valley. At this time, the Lingu Valley cultivators at the entrance of the Rift Valley were already having a hard time maintaining their defensive formation. They also needed to dodge the boulders and arrows. The silver-armored cultivators blocking the entrance of the valley only needed to launch a few waves of attacks to break into the Rift Valley, but they didn't do so. In the end, the silver-armored cultivators at the top of the 2 sides of the Rift Valley didn't throw down any more boulders and arrows. They just stared at the Lingu Valley cultivators in the Rift Valley. The Lin Valley Village's cultivators could guess that the silver-armored cultivators were preparing to trap them inside. After all, they had no supplies now, and the meat they brought with them would run out one day. When that time came, the Lin Valley Village's army would starve to death in the Rift Valley without the need for the silver-armored cultivators to do anything. The silver-armored cultivators wanted to destroy the Lingu Valley army at the smallest cost. This way, the Lingu Valley's main fighting force would be reduced by half, and Silver Moon Village would be able to do whatever they wanted to the Lingu Valley. The cultivators of the Lingu Valley had thought of digging a cave or a tunnel to escape, but their every move was under the surveillance of the enemy. They had no chance to dig a tunnel or a cave. As long as they made the slightest move, the silver-armored cultivators outside would rush to the entrance of the valley, and boulders and arrows would continuously fall from the top of the valley on both sides. The Lingu Valley troops were already in a desperate situation. A few days later, the silver-armored cultivators outside and at the top of the Rift Valley began to shout loudly for the people of the Lingu Valley to give up resistance. Those who surrendered would be spared from death if they walked out of the Rift Valley one by one. In such a desperate situation, the other party was willing to surrender. Naturally, many Lingu Valley cultivators were moved. The old village chief naturally wouldn't surrender, but he didn't object to others surrendering. What surprised everyone was that the deputy village chief, who usually acted like a tyrant in the Lingu Valley, also expressed that he wouldn't surrender. He even said that they weren't truly at a dead end, and that there was still hope. After some consideration, nearly 300 people really did choose to surrender. They slowly walked towards the entrance of the Rift Valley. These cultivators who chose to surrender were basically all alone. To them, it didn't matter which village they were in. Furthermore, there wasn't much in the Lingu Valley that they cared about. The silver-armored cultivators actually accepted the surrender of these 300 people, but only temporarily sealed their cultivation. In the next few days, the silver-armored cultivators continued to shout, and dozens of Lingu Valley villagers walked out of the Rift Valley one after another. After all, they had run out of meat. If they didn't surrender, they would only starve to death. At this juncture, the deputy village chief changed his mind. He advised the old village chief to temporarily surrender with everyone and not make unnecessary sacrifices. There was already no hope. All of you go out. I won't surrender. Even if I surrender, they won't let me go. After all, I'm the village chief, the old village chief said tiredly. If the village chief doesn't surrender, we won't surrender either. We'll fight to the death with the old village chief. At least we'll die a worthy death. The deputy village chief said righteously after a moment of hesitation. The deputy village chief had brought many people with him. Even if the deputy village chief didn't surrender, these people didn't surrender either. It was as if they would live and die with the deputy village chief and the people of the Lingu Valley. The old village chief naturally had many villagers who were loyal to him. Many of them had gone hunting with the old village chief before, and most of them had been saved by the old village chief. Thus, at this moment, they stood firmly by the old village chief's side. It was precisely because the old village chief had so many strong and loyal villagers by his side that his position in Lin Valley Village was so secure. Even though the deputy village chief had many subordinates and relatives, he never dared to challenge the old village chief. Since no one is willing to surrender, then let's eat the last remaining meat. After eating, we'll break out with all our might. Even if we die, we'll at least drag a few of them down with us. The old village chief took out some fresh wolf meat from his storage magic treasure and distributed it to everyone as he spoke. When the deputy village chief heard this, his expression changed slightly. His eyes flickered slightly, and no one knew what he was thinking. Just as the old village chief and the other Lingu Valley cultivators were preparing to eat, Xiao Lingyu, who was on a large tree not far from the Rift Valley, suddenly discovered a group of no more than 500 armored cultivators quietly approaching. Xiao Lingyu recognized this group of armored cultivators. They were the main fighting force left behind in the Lingu Valley. They had obviously come here to rescue the old village chief and the other Lingu Valley cultivators. However, how would these 400 people be able to rescue the Lin Valley village cultivators who were trapped in the valley? Their arrival was just sending them to their deaths. These 400 people didn't directly charge over. Instead, they first observed the situation, and then several leaders began to discuss. Attacking forcefully was definitely not possible, but there was almost no chance of winning either. After all, they were too few in number and simply couldn't influence the overall situation. They couldn't come to a decision, so naturally, they sent a message to the old village chief to ask for countermeasures. The old village chief's reply was to quickly leave and return to the Lingu Valley to help evacuate the villagers, and not to make unnecessary sacrifices. The old village chief also told these Lingu Valley cultivators outside that they had decided to break out at night. And just as these leaders continued to discuss countermeasures, Xiao Lingyu arrived in front of this group of cultivators, but he was surrounded by dozens of cultivators. The leaders walked over. They all recognized Xiao Lingyu. To be precise, there were few villagers in the entire Lingu Valley who didn't recognize Xiao Lingyu. This was because he had once saved Kong Ping from the high platform in the square in front of the entire village. However, Xiao Lingyu, who was originally very admired by many villagers, now made these armored cultivators and the leaders very wary. The old village chief and the deputy village chief sent a message saying that you're a spy from Silver Moon Village. How dare you come here? One of the leaders said coldly. When I joined the Lingu Valley, I also made a vow. If I were a spy, if I had done anything to betray the Lingu Valley, my soul would have long dissipated, Xiao Lingyu said calmly. Hearing this, the leaders frowned slightly. The soul oaths of cultivators in the realm of the gods were also very effective. Cultivators didn't dare to violate soul oaths at all, and if they did, their souls would dissipate. The fact that Xiao Lingyu was able to stand here unscathed was enough to prove that he wasn't a spy, and that he hadn't done anything to betray the Lingu Valley. Perhaps you have some special method to nullify soul oaths. In any case, the old village chief and the deputy village chief definitely wouldn't accuse you unjustly. One of the leaders didn't know how to refute this, so he could only reply this way. Let's hear what he wants from us first. Another leader interjected. Everyone stared at Shaoling Yu, the sharp blades in their hands glinting coldly. I'm only here to ask everyone a question. Are you determined to save the old village chief and the others in the Rift Valley? Shaoling Yu asked. Nonsense, if not to save them. Why would we come here? One of the leaders said straightforwardly. All right, since that's the case, you can follow me and charge over. Of course, I can charge at the front, Shaoling Yu said calmly. Follow you? The leaders were very hesitant and clearly didn't believe Shaoling Yu. Stay behind me. If I don't try my best to kill the enemy, you can all attack me together. I won't joke around with my life, Shaoling Yu said. The leaders pondered for a while, and then one of them said, You can lead the charge, but not now. Shaoling Yu asked, Then when? One of the leaders said, You don't need to know that. When the time comes, you're only responsible for charging at the front and opening the way for us. Shaoling Yu knew that they didn't really believe him, so he didn't ask any more questions. He just crossed his arms in front of his chest and leaned against a tree, waiting patiently. At midnight, the originally peaceful entrance of the Rift Valley suddenly heard sounds of fighting. Shaoling Yu looked up and saw streaks of flames flickering at the entrance of the Rift Valley. The sharp sounds of swords clashing and the deafening battle cries intertwined, and a thick smell of blood spread from there. Many wolf demons gradually gathered here, but when they sensed the commotion over there, they all turned around and fled. Brothers, let's charge together and save the old village chief. One of the leaders shouted, and then charged toward the exit of the Rift Valley, forgetting that Shaoling Yu was leading the way. Even if they forgot, Shaoling Yu would still charge at the front, because he had to attract the enemy's firepower and minimize the casualties of the hundreds of armored Lingu Valley cultivators. Chapter 510. The wings of extreme speed had already appeared behind Shaoling Yu. He turned into a streak of silver light and arrived at the front of the group in a flash. Then, he gradually pulled away from the group and shot towards the silver-armored cultivators at the entrance of the Rift Valley like an arrow released from a bow. The silver-armored cultivators were originally facing the entrance of the Rift Valley, and their attention should have been focused on the iron-armored cultivators who were trying their best to break out of the encirclement. However, when the battle cries sounded from behind them, 1,000 of them turned around in an orderly manner and shot their prepared crossbows at the 400 or so iron-armored cultivators of the Lingu Valley. Shaoling Yu ignored the rain of crossbow bolts and approached the silver-armored cultivators without slowing down in the slightest. The iron-armored cultivators stopped at the same time and raised their shields high above their heads, forming a steel fortress and continuing to advance. The silver-armored cultivators, who were originally at the top of the two sides of the Rift Valley, quickly descended towards the entrance of the Rift Valley. Although it was the middle of the night, and this was a sudden attack, the silver-armored cultivators seemed to have expected this. Not only were they in an orderly formation, but their speed of gathering and counterattacking was also very fast. In almost a dozen breaths of time, all the silver-armored cultivators were blocking the entrance of the Rift Valley. 3,000 of them faced the entrance of the Rift Valley, while nearly 2,000 of them had their backs to it. The two groups of silver-armored cultivators only stood firm and didn't move at all. Their shields and silver armor made their formation seem like an unbreakable fortress made of silver. The silver-armored cultivators facing the entrance of the Rift Valley were in a crescent formation. They constantly bombarded the entrance of the Rift Valley. Any supreme divinity cultivator who entered the area of their bombardment would be instantly killed. Apart from a supreme divinity cultivator like Shaoling Yu, who could withstand a round of bombardment from hundreds of supreme divinity cultivators at the same time, Shaoling Yu was currently facing the bombardment of nearly 2,000 silver-armored cultivators. Although there were only 200 or so attacks that could hit Shaoling Yu, It was enough to instantly kill any supreme divinity cultivator. However, what shocked the silver-armored cultivators was that their attacks didn't have any lethality apart from temporarily slowing down the silver figure's advance. At this moment, the cultivators with their backs to the entrance of the Rift Valley had a strange feeling. At this moment, the one who was pouncing toward them was not a great god, but a heavenly god that they could only look up to but not reach. This was only the beginning. After a few flashes, Xiao Yu quickly arrived in front of the silver-armored cultivators. Under the incredulous gazes of the dozens of silver-armored cultivators, she viciously punched a silver shield. Bang! With a loud explosion, the silver shield that was close to a medium-quality god artifact actually exploded. The cultivator holding the silver shield was unable to withstand the tremendous force, and his body instantly exploded like the shield. After the punch, Xiao Yu quickly moved to the side and arrived in front of another silver shield. She also threw a punch. Another silver shield shattered, and another silver-armored cultivator exploded. At this moment, many silver-armored cultivators were thinking, how did he do it? Could he really be a god? Stop him. Maintain the formation. One of the silver-armored cultivators shouted a warning. Thus, when Xiao Yu threw a third punch, the silver-armored cultivators snapped out of their daze and slashed or stabbed at Xiao Yu with their weapons. Xiao Yu didn't care about the defenses behind him or to his left and right. He suddenly reached out and caught all the incoming weapons with his arm. With a soft shout, the weapons all changed shape. At the same time, dozens of weapons struck Xiao Yu's body. Unfortunately, none of them could break through his body's defense. Xiao Yu's body was a peak medium-quality divine artifact. Even a high-quality divine artifact might not be able to break through it, let alone the low-quality divine artifacts in the silver-armored cultivator's hands. On a small mountain about 300 feet away from the entrance of the Rift Valley, a cultivator in brocade robes was staring in the direction of the entrance. The cultivator in brocade robes also saw Xiao Yu, but he didn't look too surprised. He only frowned slightly. This person didn't look very old, but he was rather tall and well-proportioned. His face was as gentle as jade, and his eyes shone brightly. One could tell at a glance that he was no ordinary person. Behind this person were two women with swords in their hands. The two women were naturally beautiful, and they were dressed in tight robes that made them appear valiant and formidable. They stood behind the man, probably because their status wasn't as high as his. However, they didn't look like servant girls, but more like female bodyguards. Third young master, this person should be a god. Should we take care of him? One of the women asked, holding her sword. The young man didn't immediately respond. Instead, he pondered for a moment, then said, "He's not a god. How is that possible?" The two women were extremely astonished. I also think it's quite inconceivable. A great divinity cultivator can kill nearly 2,000 great divinities as if he's invincible. The man rubbed his nose and smiled. The two women frowned, but didn't respond. Have the Silver Moon Village retreat. If this continues, it'll be disadvantageous for them, the man said after watching for a while longer. Retreat? Just like that? Then wouldn't third young master's previous plans? Before the woman could finish speaking, the man had already turned and descended the mountain. The two women followed after him. As they descended the mountain, they took out their transmission beads to send messages. At that moment, Xiao Yu had already disrupted the formation of the silver-armored cultivators. The nearly 500 silver-armored cultivators who had just arrived from the Linggu Valley saw Xiao Yu's bravery and naturally followed closely behind him. They were like incomparably sharp blades, stabbing into the enemy's bellies and causing large numbers of casualties. Xiao Yu had just charged to a spot 30 meters away from the entrance when the several thousand silver-armored cultivators suddenly retreated to the sides like a receding tide. Xiao Yu was a little confused by their retreat, but he didn't chase after them. Although he had disrupted their formation and continuously killed their people, there were still thousands of them. they could still easily kill everyone in the Linggu Valley. However, they didn't do so. This made Xiao Lingyu a little confused, so he didn't chase after them. There was no need for him to do so. After charging for a while, Xiao Lingyu's clothes were already in tatters, and he was dripping with blood. In addition to his dense, murderous aura, he really gave off the feeling that he had just climbed out a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. The old village chief and the other Linggu Valley cultivators who were originally prepared to break out of the encirclement had actually only launched a round of attacks just now. Seeing that their opponents were already waiting for them seriously, they didn't have any hope of killing their way out. Moreover, they didn't even have the chance to kill their way in front of their opponents, so they rationally gave up on breaking out of the encirclement. At this time, there weren't many casualties. On the other hand, there were only about 200 Linggu Valley cultivators who had followed Xiao Lingyu to break out of the encirclement. This was all thanks to Xiao Lingyu attracting the enemy's firepower from the front. It was also thanks to Xiao Lingyu opening a breakthrough for them. Otherwise, they would have been completely wiped out. Xiao Lingyu stood at the entrance of the Rift Valley, his entire body dripping with dirty blood. The 200 or so silver-armored cultivators who were also covered in blood stood behind him. The old village chief and the other Linggu Valley cultivators who were guarding the entrance of the Rift Valley saw this scene and felt very moved and grateful. He is the traitor of our Linggu Valley. Everyone quickly kill him. The deputy village chief jumped out from the entrance of the Rift Valley and shouted loudly as he pointed at Xiao Lingyu. But whether it was the silver-armored cultivators in the Rift Valley or those outside, no one paid any attention to the deputy village chief's shout, nor did anyone attack Xiao Lingyu. The old village chief also walked out. He patted the deputy village chief's shoulder and said, "There is definitely a traitor in our village, but it is definitely not him." After saying this, the old village chief walked in front of Xiao Lingyu, clasped his fists and bowed, saying, "On behalf of all the villagers of the Linggu Valley, I apologize for mistaking you for being a spy. I apologize for attacking you before, and I thank you for being righteous and saving us. You are the benefactor of the entire Linggu Valley." Although Xiao Lingyu did indeed feel resentful, he felt a little better after hearing the old village chief's words and actions. However, Xiao Lingyu still walked in front of the deputy village chief and said with a smile, "I am very surprised." The deputy village chief felt that the aura exuding from Xiao Lingyu's body made him feel a little suppressed. He involuntarily took a step back and asked in a trembling voice, "Surprised about what?" Xiao Lingyu still had a smile on his face and said, "Surprised that you didn't surrender." The deputy village chief forced himself to calm down and snorted coldly. "I am not a coward who is afraid of death. No matter what, I am still the deputy village chief of the Linggu Valley. Why would I surrender and drag out an ignoble existence?" Xiao Lingyu continued forward and laughed loudly. "Huh, you have backbone." Xiao Lingyu felt that if there really was a traitor in the Linggu Valley, then it must be the high and mighty deputy village chief of the Linggu Valley. Of course, he did not have any evidence. This was only his intuition and guess. Perhaps it was because he hated the deputy village chief that he had such thoughts. Xiao Lingyu walked to the side of Yueru and Kong Ping, then turned and stood still like an ordinary Linggu Valley villager. In the entire Linggu Valley, Xiao Lingyu's relationship with Yueru and Kong Ping was slightly better. Xiao Lingyu admired Kong Ping's righteousness and courage. He was not afraid of power and authority. Xiao Lingyu liked Yueru's intelligence, graceful temperament, and magnanimous character. Xiao Lingyu also felt close to her. No matter why the silver-armored cultivators suddenly retreated, the people of the Linggu Valley could not stay here any longer. They did not make any adjustments and rushed towards the Linggu Valley at full speed. Along the way, no one spoke. When they looked at their companions, they all had a bit of suspicion in their eyes. Chapter 511. Silvermoon Village had originally left 1,000 silver-armored cultivators outside the Linggu Valley, but they had retreated long ago. After returning to the village, everyone naturally needed to recuperate and did not gather to discuss anything. In everyone's hearts, they suddenly realized that if they had listened to Xiao Lingyu's opinion previously, the Linggu Valley would not have suffered such a great loss. Previously, the Linggu Valley was already no match for Silver Moon Village. Now, the difference in strength between the two sides had widened considerably. Furthermore, in the battle at the Rift Valley, if Silver Moon Village had not retreated and fought with all their might, the Linggu Valley's armor cultivators would not have survived even if they could rely on Xiao Lingyu's help to charge out. In other words, Silver Moon Village had purposely let the armored cultivators of the Linggu Valley go home. They had intentionally let them go, not because they could not defeat them. It was precisely because they had realized this that everyone returned with gloomy expressions and heavy hearts. Most importantly, no one could be sure if Silver Moon Village would still attack the Linggu Valley in the future, or when they would attack again. As for their suspicions of Xiao Lingyu, they naturally no longer had any. Not only because everyone had seen Xiao Lingyu's performance, but also because of the very certain words the old village chief had said at the Rift Valley entrance. Xiao Lingyu had performed outstandingly in this crisis in the Linggu Valley. He was already very famous in the Linggu Valley, and now his reputation had risen again. No matter who saw him in the village, they would all nod in greeting. There were even some women who looked at him with amorous eyes. Many female cultivators who had always said that they did not want to marry and would not marry felt their frozen hearts move. If not for the fact that the crisis in the Linggu Valley had not been resolved, the matchmakers would have already trampled on Xiao Lingyu's doorstep. Silver Moon Village's attack had not yet arrived, but after a month, Silver Moon Village sent someone to request an audience with the village chief and deputy village chief. No matter what, Silver Moon Village was now in an advantageous position and had the initiative. Thus, the village chief and deputy village chief invited the person from Silver Moon Village into the valley and brought him to a secret room for a discussion. The conversation lasted for a full 2 hours before it ended. Then the person from Silver Moon Village hurriedly left the Linggu Valley. After that, the 2 village chiefs and the 2 village chiefs of the Linggu Valley also gathered together. Xiao Lingyu and Medicine Master Yuru were also invited. Silver Moon Village's people want us to join their alliance. After everyone had arrived, the old village chief began to speak. After looking at everyone's expressions, he continued, Silver Moon Village belongs to an alliance. That person didn't go into detail about the details of this alliance. He only said that they already have a few dozen villages that aren't any weaker than Lin Valley Village. Moreover, they have a very powerful force supporting them from behind. If we are willing to join, then the leader of that strong backing will come to discuss the details. If we are not willing, at this point, the old village chief paused for a moment and then continued, if we are not willing, they will not allow the Linggu Valley to exist in the realm of the gods. If we join their alliance, we will be protected and supported by their alliance. However, we will also have to pay tribute every once in a while. Furthermore, if the alliance has any big operations or needs, we will have to send people to help and obey the alliance's orders and arrangements. First, they kill our people, then make us submit collectively. They are too ruthless. If they want us to join, then wouldn't it be better to send someone to negotiate from the beginning? I don't think that person's words are trustworthy. They see that they can't eat us alive, so they're using a scheme now. Yes, they're very good at scheming. The leaders in the secret room began to discuss, but no one seemed to believe the words of the person from Silver Moon Village. However, Xiao Lingyu felt that the other party was not lying, because there was no need for them to lie. Furthermore, they had the opportunity to destroy the main fighting force of the Linggu Valley. They must have other considerations if they did not do so. It was easy to understand why Silver Moon Village did not come to negotiate from the beginning, but chose to attack the Linggu Valley first. If they had come to negotiate from the beginning, the Linggu Valley would have rejected them without hesitation. After all, the Linggu Valley did not have any strong enemies in the past, so they did not need any protection or support. Naturally, they would not be willing to pay tribute. For countless years, the Linggu Valley was barely self-sufficient. The village did not have much food in reserve, and they had to support many idle people. Paying tribute every once in a while would undoubtedly increase the burden. Therefore, the alliance that Silver Moon Village belonged to had let Silver Moon Village attack the Lingu Valley first. Firstly, it was to let the Lingu Valley know of their strength, and secondly, it was to let the Lingu Valley feel threatened. It was to let the Lingu Valley know that they needed protection. At the same time, it was to let the Lingu Valley know that their alliance had the strength to protect the Lingu Valley. I feel that the person from Silver Moon Village is not lying. I also feel that we should join their alliance. The Lingu Valley can no longer withstand a war, the deputy village chief said. Although I am the village chief, I cannot make a decision on this matter. Let's follow the old rules and vote, the old village chief said to everyone. What surprised Shaoling Yu was that even the deputy village chief agreed to join the alliance. But the result of the vote was that the majority was not willing to join the alliance. In that case, everyone could disperse. No matter what, everyone should adjust their state of mind and strengthen the defenses around the village. Send more people to stand guard outside, the old village chief said to everyone. Back in his house, Shaoling Yu sighed and said, "They won't give up until they see the Yellow River. They won't cry until they see the coffin." Yellow River? Yueru and Kong Ping were a little confused when they heard this word. Most of the leaders are unwilling to compromise because they know that the village is under a lot of pressure to survive. If they have to pay tribute and contribute to the alliance from time to time, it will make everyone's lives more difficult, and they might not even be able to continue. In addition, they still feel that the alliance might be an excuse from Silver Moon Village. They feel that Silver Moon Village might not have the courage to attack our valley, so they are unwilling to agree to their request. Shaoling Yu analyzed calmly. That is indeed the case. Kong Ping, who had voted against the alliance, nodded and said, the two village chiefs had made an agreement with the person from Silver Moon Village. If the Lingu Valley did not respond within 2 months, it would mean that they had refused to join the alliance. 2 months passed in the blink of an eye. The old village chief asked for everyone's opinion again. Although 2 of the leaders changed their minds, the leaders who insisted on not compromising still made up the majority. The alliance behind Silver Moon Village really came as promised. A neatly dressed Argent Legion slowly approached the gates of the Lingu Valley. Standing on top of a mountain in the valley, Shaoling Yu looked at the enemies who were like a silver fortress and couldn't help but frown. After a few glances, he realized that there were about 10,000 people on the other side. They didn't look like villagers who were out hunting, but more like an army of tigers and wolves with strict military discipline. With the strength of Silver Moon Village alone, it was impossible for them to gather 10,000 people to attack the Lingu Valley. After all, the entire Silver Moon Village only had about 10,000 people. This meant that the people from Silver Moon Village were not the only ones who had come. There were definitely people from other places as well. Thus, no one doubted the existence of the alliance. Shaoling Yu knew that unless he used the divine weapon, the Lingu Valley's current situation would definitely lead to defeat. Shaoling Yu still didn't dare to use the divine weapon because he knew that he would get into trouble because of his wealth. His current strength was still low. Once the news of him possessing a divine weapon was exposed, he would quickly become the target of the experts in the realm of the gods. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he definitely wouldn't use the divine weapon. The Argent Legion stopped 3,000 feet away from the Lingu Valley's gate. The square formation gradually became a line. "Do we still want to fight?" the old village chief asked everyone. Looking at the enemy's formation, anyone could guess what the result would be if they continued fighting. Thus, the leaders who had insisted on rejecting the alliance all laughed bitterly and shook their heads silently. "Then let's agree to their alliance." As the old village chief spoke, he took out a piece of white cloth and wrote on it, "We are willing to join the alliance." Then, the old village chief tied the white cloth to an arrow and personally pulled the crossbow, shooting the arrow towards the enemy's camp. Under everyone's gaze, the arrow landed in front of the enemy's camp and was picked up by a silver-armored cultivator. Not long after, the arrow was shot back by the other party. The white cloth was still tied to the end of the arrow. Taking down the white cloth and unfolding it, the old village chief and Xiao Lingyu saw two very eye-catching words. "It's too late. Sigh, let's prepare for battle." The old village chief sighed. At this point, there was no use in regretting. Everyone had been forced into a dead end and could only fight with all their might. However, no one blamed the leaders who had insisted on rejecting the alliance. Although everyone was only a small character in the divine realm, small characters had their own dignity. They would also be unyielding and fight back. The enemy didn't give the Linggu Valley too much time to prepare. After they had set up their formation, countless arrows turned into streaks of light that filled the sky and flew from the ground to the top of the mountain above the Linggu Valley's gate. At the same time, a large group of silver-armored cultivators raised their shields and slowly walked towards the blocked entrance of the valley. The Linggu Valley cultivators on the mountaintop retaliated with arrows and fireballs that they had prepared beforehand. At the very beginning, it was a contest of attrition. The side attacking the valley needed to exhaust the Linggu Valley's long-range attacks before they could truly attack the mountaintop. The old village chief had originally ordered people to light up the huge braziers at the top of the valley to create fire dragons to aid in the defense. However, Xiao Lingyu advised the old village chief not to use the braziers for now. Although the old village chief didn't know why, he still chose to believe Xiao Lingyu because Xiao Lingyu's previous suggestions were all correct. Then, Xiao Lingyu quietly went to the back of the valley and left alone. An hour passed. The two sides were still shooting arrows at each other, but Xiao Lingyu didn't appear again. 2 hours, 4 hours, after a full half a day, the Linggu Valley's arrows and fireballs had all fallen, but Xiao Lingyu still hadn't returned. Chapter 512. Xiao Lingyu naturally could not have escaped. He had only left temporarily and would definitely return soon. Lin Valley Village's arrows and fireballs had been used up, but they had only managed to kill less than 500 enemies. The enemy had not suffered any serious injuries. Furthermore, they were already climbing up a slope that was not too steep towards the top of the valley. Next, it would be a hand-to-hand battle between the two armies. However, the enemy's combat power was 3 times that of the Linggu Valleys. There was almost no suspense in this battle. Just then, another piece of bad news arrived. The exit of the secret passageway leading to the outside of Lin Valley Village had been found and blocked by the enemy. Even the new secret passageway that the old village chief had opened with his men had been discovered by the enemy. Fortunately, those passageways could only be used to leave and not enter. Otherwise, the enemy would have used those secret passageways to kill their way into the valley. This was enough to prove that there was definitely a traitor in the Linggu Valley. However, there was no time to find that traitor now. The enemy had already rushed up. The Linggu Valley's last batch of fireballs were pushed down. After killing a few hundred of the enemy, they could only wave their weapons and fight a bloody battle. Village chief, shouldn't we light these braziers? If we don't light them now, I'm afraid we won't have a chance later. The deputy village chief suggested to the old village chief. The old village chief hesitated for a moment, then said, "Let's wait a little longer. If we really want to light them, it's best to do it when most of the enemy is at the mountainside. We can't wait any longer. We should kill more of them first. We can't wait until they're at the mountainside before we act." The deputy village chief did not listen to the old village chief this time. Instead, he led his trusted aides and rushed toward the brazier. The old village chief originally wanted to stop them, but when he saw a large group of flying beasts in the distant sky like rolling dark clouds sweeping over, he himself also ran towards a brazier and shouted for the other villagers to quickly light the braziers beside them. The cries of the flying beasts gradually became clearer, and there were also the howls of wolves mixed in. The villagers of the Linggu Valley, who were standing at the top of the mountain, saw a familiar scene. Countless wolf demons were rushing over from afar like huge waves in the ocean. In the sky, there were countless flying beasts. The flying beasts were chasing after the wolf demons, and the wolf demons were chasing after Xiaolingyu. At this moment, Xiaolingyu was riding on the back of the chaos beast, Fudi. Behind him were 5 silver-haired wolf kings. He had provoked these silver-haired wolf kings, but they couldn't catch up to him. That was why these wolf kings were completely enraged. Then, these wolf kings summoned their children to attack Xiaolingyu. As for the Fudi, he had woken up from his slumber half a month ago. After digesting the cultivation of so many wolf kings, the Fudi's strength had increased significantly. At least now, his speed was much faster than that of the silver-haired wolf kings. If not for the fact that the Fudi had woken up, Xiaolingyu wouldn't have had the courage to provoke so many silver-haired wolf kings without using the divine weapon. Xiaolingyu, who was standing steadily on the back of the Fudi, would occasionally use the chaos seal to bombard the wolf pack behind them. Every time, he would kill a large number of wolf demons, which was why so many flying beasts were attracted. The wolf demons that covered the mountains and plains, as well as the flying beasts that blotted out the sun, shocked the Lin Valley village cultivators and the silver-armored cultivators. They looked at Xiaolingyu in disbelief. However, this situation naturally brought hope to the Lingu Valley, because the wolf demons would definitely attack the other party first. At this moment, the leaders of the Lingu Valley understood why Xiaolingyu had asked them not to light the braziers previously. It was because the braziers had to be left to deal with the flying beasts in the sky. When the silver-armored cultivators found out that there were countless wolf demons rushing towards them, it was already too late for them to retreat. Now that they were surrounded by countless wolf demons, they could only turn around and rely on the mountains of the Lingu Valley to defend themselves. They were powerless to attack the Lingu Valley again. Xiaolingyu rode on the Fudi and didn't rush to the top of the valley. Instead, he led the silver-haired wolf king around the Argent Legion. When the silver-haired wolf kings saw that they couldn't catch up to Xiaolingyu, and that there were a large number of human cultivators gathered here, they finally found a place to vent their anger. They began to command the wolf pack to attack the Argent Legion crazily. The Argent Legion's long-range attacks had already been used up in the battle with the Lingu Valley. At this moment, they could only use their shields to block in front of them and use the sharp blades in their hands to assassinate the wolf demons. However, the Argent Legion could hold on for a long time against ordinary wolf demons, but there were still silver-haired wolf kings in the wolf pack. A silver-haired wolf king fiercely rammed into the Argent Legion, knocking over a large number of them in an instant. No one would have thought that the situation would be so grim for the Argent Legion. It was very likely that they would be completely wiped out here. The Lingu Valley only defended against the flying beasts in the sky. Although the pressure was not small, their huge braziers had a strong restraining effect on the flying beasts. They could at least hold on for a long time. Compared to facing the attacks of the Argent Legion, the Lingu Valley was naturally more willing to face these flying beasts. On a steep mountain peak not far from the Lingu Valley, the brocade-robed man and the 2 beautiful women behind him were all frowning at this time. "This guy is really hateful," one of the women said hatefully. "That mount of his should be at the heavenly god stage." Another woman added, "That mount is not at the heavenly god stage." The brocade-robed man shook his head and then said, "The 2 of you go down and deal with those wolf king." "Yes." The 2 women hugged their swords and directly jumped down from the top of the mountain. At the foot of the mountain, there were also countless wolf demons, but these wolf demons did not notice that there were people on the top of the mountain before, so they did not attack. As soon as the 2 women landed, they naturally attracted a swarm of nearby wolf demons, but they were not afraid at all. Moreover, they did not let their long swords out of their sheaths. Instead, they were like 2 sparrowhawks, lightly and nimbly shuttling through the pack of wolves, and were actually able to avoid the attacks of all the wolf demons. After a few flashes, the 2 women, who were dressed in blue today and carrying long swords, had already rushed to the side of the Argent Legion. Then, They quickly separated and each attacked a silver-haired wolf king. What was surprising was that although they looked thin and fragile, just a sweep of their swords had already caused a deep wound on the silver-haired wolf king's body. The silver-haired wolf king had the cultivation of the heavenly god stage, but it was only at the early stage of the heavenly god stage. Compared to human cultivators of the same stage, wolf demons' overall strength was inferior. Looking at the speed of the two women's attacks, as well as the lethality of their long swords, it was clear that they were definitely at the heavenly god stage and did not seem to be at the early stage. Although the silver-haired wolf king tried its best to dodge and even tried to counterattack, every wolf king that faced the two human women could only last for less than 10 breaths of time before it let out a few miserable cries and fell heavily to the ground, blood flowing into a pool. Fudi was still moving quickly, and Xiao Lingyu, who was on its back, looked at the two women with great surprise. There were definitely no heavenly gods in the nearby villages, and there was no meaning or future for heavenly god stage cultivators to stay in the village. All the villagers who had reached the heavenly god stage would choose to leave the village and go to other places to seek development. And these two women had helped the Argent Legion, so it was easy to guess which alliance they were from. Suddenly, Xiao Lingyu turned her gaze and looked behind her. At this moment, there was actually another person, and it looked like he was definitely at the heavenly god stage. The newcomer was dressed in embroidered robes and shuttled through the wolf pack. Ever since Xiao Lingyu noticed him, he only used 3 breaths of time to rush to Xiao Lingyu's side, and a long sword that emitted a cold light appeared in his hand. This long sword was close to the quality of a high-grade divine artifact, and appeared to be incomparably sharp. The cultivator in embroidered robes held it horizontally, and with bursts of sword light, he stabbed it towards Xiao Lingyu's shoulder. Xiao Lingyu knew that the newcomer was very strong, so he did not dare to be careless. First, he leaned to the side, and then used the silver moon broken saber to clamp the long sword, so that the long sword would not change its move and sweep across his neck. The newcomer did not change his move, but instead jumped and brushed past Xiao Lingyu. Just as the newcomer's body was about to fall, the newcomer suddenly swept his hand back. Not only was the attack sharp, but also swept out a large area of shining white sword light. Xiao Lingyu was also very experienced in fighting. He immediately climbed on a Fudi's back and dodged the opponent's thunderous attack. At this moment, Fudi flew far away and, under Xiao Lingyu's instructions, rushed to the top of the valley. The cultivator in embroidered robes did not seem to really want to fight to the death with Xiao Lingyu. He casually dealt with a few wolf demons that approached him, and then leaped with his back to the valley, disappearing in a few moments. Xiao Lingyu went to the top of the mountain, and first looked for the cultivator in embroidered robes, and then learned from Kong Ping that the cultivator had flown away. Only then did he relax a little, and then began to help everyone block the attacks of the flying beasts. Outside the valley, the two women had also killed all the Wolf King, but they could not stop the countless wolf demons from continuing to attack the Argent Legion's defense. Perhaps because the death of the silver-haired Wolf King had stimulated the wolf demons, their attacks were almost continuous, and there was no sign of them stopping. Fortunately, the Argent Legion's formation was very stable. Without the Wolf King's attack, their defense was much easier, and at this time, the two heavenly deity women were helping them. However, the Argent Legion had people dying almost every moment, and their casualties were increasing with time. Chapter 513. Such a huge battle would definitely consume a lot of energy. Not only would the bodies of the human practitioners gradually become unable to take it, their condition would gradually deteriorate. It was the same for the wolf demons and flying beasts. The reason why they retreated was most likely because they needed to replenish their energy. Furthermore, the night in the realm of the gods was rather special. The distance that practitioners could see at night would be greatly reduced, and even the range that their consciousness could cover would be reduced. In fact, in this battle, the silver-armored practitioners and the Lingu Valley did not cause many casualties to the other side. It was originally a battle between them, but in the end, it became a battle between them and the wolf demons and flying beasts. The Lingu Valley had special weapons to deal with the flying beasts. Furthermore, they did not suffer any attacks from the ground, so their losses were very small. Most of the villagers were injured, and less than 100 people died in the battle. However, it was different for the Argent Legion. Not only did they face countless attacks from the wolf demons, they were also occasionally attacked by the flying beasts. Most importantly, the silver-haired Wolf King also caused them a lot of trouble. As a result, they suffered heavy casualties. More than 10,000 people came, but now only about 3,000 people were left. Furthermore, most of these 3,000 people were also seriously injured. This was all thanks to the help of the two female gods. Otherwise, this seemingly mighty Argent Legion would have been completely wiped out. As a result, it was definitely impossible to continue attacking the Lingu Valley. The Argent Legion was even worried that the Lingu Valley would suddenly charge out. Together with the wolf demons and flying beasts, they quickly retreated and distanced themselves from the Lingu Valley. A battle that was undoubtedly a victory for the Argent Legion had turned out like this. Not only would this greatly boost the morale of the Lingu Valley, it would also deal a heavy blow to the morale of the Argent Legion. It would also infuriate the leader of the Argent Legion. The two female gods protected the Argent Legion as they retreated for a distance. Then, they quietly left without saying goodbye. On a mountain peak about 3,000 miles away from the Lingu Valley, the two female gods stood behind the man in embroidered clothes. Although they had just fought for a few hours, their clothes were still very clean. However, a few strands of messy hair on their foreheads proved that they had not been relaxed before. Although the ordinary wolf demons and even the Wolf King could not do anything to the two female gods, they were still able to exhaust the two female gods. The two female gods also had to continuously wield their swords to kill the endless wolf demons. What should we do next? Should we charge straight into the village? A woman asked anxiously as she brushed the hair on her forehead. I don't want to rely on my family's strength. Although you have been following me, you are still part of the family. The man in embroidered clothes shook his head resolutely. Then he said, that guy's a talent. However, he alone cannot protect the Lingu Valley. Send a message to the one in the Lingu Valley and ask him to find a way to expel that guy from the village. The female god nodded. Then, she took out her communication bead and sent a message. Not long after, the woman received a reply. She furrowed her brows and said, he said it's very difficult because that fellow has performed meritorious deeds repeatedly. Right now, he's at the peak of his fame, and everyone in Lingu Village trusts and respects him. It's very difficult to find a reason to expel him. Haha, this is his matter. It is not something for me to consider. I just asked him to do it. He has to do it, and he has to do it. If he can't even do this, what use do we have for him? Just tell him that. After saying this, the man in embroidered clothes turned and left. After the battle, the Lingu Valley was sending off the dead. Everyone gathered in the square in the center of the village. They surrounded the corpses of their fellow villagers, who were neatly arranged around the high platform. As they walked, they silently mourned. The old village chief was on the altar, constantly chanting an ancient incantation. As a villager of the Lingu Valley, Shaolin Yu naturally gathered in the square with everyone else. Although these dead people had nothing to do with him, at least in his eyes, these people were heroes. Moreover, they had died a worthy death. In this world of cultivation, whether it was the world of cultivators, immortals, devils, or demons, or even the current heavenly realm, many cultivators were chasing after a stronger cultivation. They were fighting for treasures, fighting for techniques, fighting for anything. How many people would be willing to contribute? Even Shaolin Yu, if not for his family or friends, would try his best to avoid trouble. He would also fight for benefits. Moreover, he did not like to lose out. The more cultivators cultivated, the thinner and more narrow-minded they became. In this Lingu Valley, Shaolin Yu saw some of the fickleness of human nature. He vaguely felt that he was in a small mountain village in ancient times. For the sake of protecting their loved ones, for the sake of protecting their home, for the sake of this small village, these villagers were worthy of respect. Although their deaths were not enough to bring about any changes to the god realm, and although their deaths would be laughable and powerless in the eyes of many selfish cultivators, they were true heroes. The ceremony did not last long. The old village chief personally placed the corpses into the bonfire. When the fire was extinguished, everyone returned home. Xiaoling Yu did not return home. He did not have a real home in this village. He went to the top of the mountain around the valley and looked into the distance with a few villagers who were in charge of guarding the area. Although this battle was a fluke, the enemy had suffered such heavy losses. They would definitely not give up. They would definitely come back again. The Lingu Valley was still in danger. There was an even fiercer test to come. What worried Xiaoling Yu was that there were already heavenly gods among the enemy. What did the Lingu Valley have to fight against heavenly gods? At this moment, the villagers of the Lingu Valley were all looking up at the sky. The sky was dark and heavy, just like everyone's mood. Xiaoling Yu, on the other hand, was thinking about what he should do. If he continued fighting, the enemy would become anxious. If they sent out heavenly gods, he would have no other choice but to use the divine weapon. If he stopped fighting, he would have to abandon the Lingu Valley. However, he could not let go. Although he did not have deep feelings for the Lingu Valley, these days he had seen too many Lingu Valley villagers fight with no regard for their lives. He had seen them fall into pools of blood after being attacked by the enemy's swords. He had also seen them look at him with admiration and trust. He really could not bear to see this group of villagers being slaughtered. "What are you looking at?" Yueru asked softly as he came to Xiaoling Yu's side. "Nothing." Xiaoling Yu came back to his senses and replied calmly. "Will you leave the Lingu Valley?" Yueru asked as he sat on a rock beside him. "What about you? If you have the chance, do you want to leave?" Xiaoling Yu asked with a smile. "I'm not leaving. I grew up in the Lingu Valley. My father died when I was still in my mother's womb. My mother passed away after giving birth to me. I was raised by these villagers. As long as this village is still here, I will not leave," Yueru replied calmly. Xiaoling Yu could tell that Yueru was filled with gratitude. Although cultivators like Yueru were not weak, they had not experienced the hardships and battles of the cultivation world or the three realms of immortals, demons, and demons. They had lived in this small village since they were born. There were not many things that could make them narrow-minded and cold. They were more humane than those cultivators who had ascended from the lower realm. Almost all of the cultivators who had ascended from the lower realm had experienced many hardships. They had been schemed against by others, and they had also schemed against others. Their hearts were no longer pure. I'm the same. As long as this village is still here, I will not leave," Xiaoling Yu replied with a smile. However, there was another meaning to his words. If this village was no longer here, he would leave. Xiaoling Yu knew that even if the god of heaven intervened, he could still save his own life. However, Yueru did not know Xiaoling Yu's methods and reliance. Therefore, Yueru thought that Xiaoling Yu was prepared to live and die with the village. Therefore, he was moved and grateful. When he looked at Xiaoling Yu again, his gaze was warmer and gentler than before. There was also a different kind of color in his eyes. On the second day, the Argent Legion did not make a comeback. On the third day, the fourth day, more than a month had passed. The Lingu Valley was still not under attack. For more than a month, everyone's mood had been very tense. Even now, they had not relaxed. However, everyone was now guessing whether the enemy was unable to attack the Lingu Valley again because of the heavy losses they had suffered last time. If that was the case, it would be great. The ferocious counterattack that they had imagined did not come. As time passed, everyone gradually relaxed. The villagers who had been sent out to investigate also continuously returned with news. Within a few thousand miles of the Lingu Valley, there were no traces of the enemy. At the beginning, Xiaoling Yu would often go to the top of the valley to help keep watch. Later on, he lost his patience and returned to his stone house to recuperate. One night, a girl suddenly came to find Xiaoling Yu. She said that medicine master Yueru had invited him over. Xiaoling Yu recognized this girl. She was called Mo. She lived next to Yueru and was learning the art of refining medicine from Yueru. Many times, Yueru would invite Xiaoling Yu over. If she was too busy, she would ask Mo to come over. After passing the message, Mo walked away alone. "Why do you want me to go over in the middle of the night?" Although Xiaoling Yu was a little confused, he still walked over. Yueru's house was not far from Xiaoling Yu's stone house. In just a few moments, he had already arrived at Yueru's door. Yueru's house had 3 rooms. There were no windows. At this moment, the door to the living room was open. Xiaoling Yu and Yueru were considered friends and had a good relationship. Thus, he did not greet him and walked directly into the living room. In Xiaoling Yu's opinion, since Yueru had invited him first, it was only right for him to leave the door open. Yueru was not in the living room. When Xiaoling Yu heard the sound of water coming from the side room, he thought that Yueru was brewing some kind of medicinal decoction and asked him for help. Therefore, he pushed open the side room's door that looked like a screen. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.